Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on YouTube. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and this is Robservations episode 808. My God, these episodes have been sparse, but I'm bringing more back. You're going to see more Robservations. It's what you want. It's what you demand. It's what you ever, people want uncut, unfettered R&B. People are like, Rob, you're just, you're too sedate on the John Campea show. Listen, I'm a guest. I can't be full-on R&B on the John Campea show. Can't do that. But I'm not disingenuous. I'm just measured. Not on this show, baby. On this show, I go full-on R&B. You want full, uncut, snortable R&B? Come get it right here. Anyway, it is sober October, just so you know. No, in all honesty, there's something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And, in our fan spaces, there's a lot of, shall we say, rage, anger. It's like Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talks about the stages of death: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Except we don't accept anything. And I understand that. Accept no substitutes. I get it. But what I wanted to talk about was adaptation. No, not the great Nicolas Cage film, but what does it mean when you translate or adapt one thing into another? Now, when I grew up, I was a huge fan of director Stanley Kubrick. I still am. He's my favorite director of all time. Most of Kubrick's work was adaptation. He adapted books. He had adapted Lolita, and he actually worked on the screenplay with Vladimir Nabokov, the actual author of the book. Dr. Strangelove was an adaptation of a book. Barry Lyndon, of course, William Makepeace Thackeray, and then Clockwork Orange was Anthony Burgess. The Shining, Stephen King, obviously. Full Metal Jacket was an adaptation. And Eyes Wide Shut was an adaptation of a story. Dream novel, Tromneville or something. And yet, they're all very different. David Cronenberg, another favorite director of mine, adapted a number of novels. The Dead Zone, Naked Lunch. He adapted The Play on Butterfly. He adapted, of course, Crash. And Kubrick and Cronenberg did not have a slavish fealty to the original text. They made it their own. Now, of course, we as fans, we've been seeing a lot of adaptation, a lot of comic adaptation, and I specifically wanted to talk about the upcoming Wakanda Forever. Now, I haven't seen it. I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it. I like going into the Marvel Cinematic Universe spoiler-free. You want to talk to me about, although I will say, yes, I have read all 5 scripts of Secret Invasion. 5. And I'll tell you, I really liked it. I'm not going to say anything about it, but I really liked it. It's very serious. It's much more like a spy thriller. It's kind of, if I would equate it to anything, it's a very Andor in terms of, it's not as deliberately paced as Andor, but it's very much a Tom Clancy-esque spy thriller. I really liked it. But here's the thing. So there's been a lot of chatter online talking about our boy Namor. A lot of people are upset that Namor is not a direct adaptation of Namor. I understand that. I mean, I've been a fan of Namor. Obviously, Namor was one of the very first Marvel Comics characters, first published in 1939, along with the original Human Torch and Captain America. And what's really interesting is that Namor was created as a response to the Human Torch, fire and water. And Everett Smith, the creator of Namor, based Namor on the poem The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and which is sort of very interesting. But now here's the thing. The MCU has one large looming problem, and that is Aquaman. Warner Brothers, DC's Aquaman, beat Namor to the punch. They got the rights back later. They couldn't make a Namor film, and they finally were able to do it. And they couldn't... see, here's the thing. Obviously, the idea of Atlantis is in the public domain. However, once you adapt something, like, for instance, if you want to make a Thor and Loki movie, you could. They're obviously in the public domain. They're Norse myths. But if any of it resembled the Marvel Comics version of those things, you would be in trouble. You'd have to make sure that your that your Thor movie and Loki movie and Odin movie looked nothing at all like Marvel's comics. And so it would be very difficult to do an MCU adaptation of Namor without running afoul of the Atlantis that has already been put on screen by DC. These are legal issues, and in order to simplify those issues, Ryan Coogler, obviously an accomplished auteur, writer-director, wrote the script, directed Wakanda Forever like he did with the first Black Panther, was faced with a dilemma. Obviously, he wanted to use Namor for reasons we're going to get into, because in the comics, Namor and Atlantis and Wakanda have a long history. But I think really why it was appealing to Ryan Coogler when he probably first started out, not knowing what was going to happen with Ryan Coogler, the idea of having two different hidden civilizations on Earth, each with kings that ran those civilizations that would run afoul of one another, probably appealed to him. Now, for those kinds of reasons, they had to change the idea of what Namor was. Now, I am really fascinated. I grew up really interested in the Mayan civilization, the Aztec civilization, because when I was a kid, I read a lot about ancient astronauts, Chariots of the Gods, The Outer Space Connection, that movie that Sun Classic Pictures made, the lines at Nazca that look like landing fields when you saw them from the air. Where did the Mayan civilization go? And I think asking yourself, okay, if you're Ryan Coogler, Wakanda is a fictitious nation on the African continent. So I think it makes a lot of sense to then ask yourself, okay, well, you could do Atlantis, but what if you were able to create a civilization that had ties to a real location on Earth? The Mayan and the Aztec civilizations were suddenly gone. I mean, the Mayan civilization basically disappeared. Where did it go? And so I think it was a naturally occurring idea. I mean, I love this idea that Coogler had. Now, I know comic book purists are like, we don't like this, and Namor looks ridiculous, or whatever the complaints that people have. I've heard them all. Trust me, I've read them all. I've heard them all. And I'm not saying that you're wrong, that people who want to object to this are wrong, but I just want to point out that I have heard, in my entire time as a fanboy here on Earth, every single time a comic book adaptation has been made, with the exception of Superman the movie, because no one was really thinking about it, people have complained. People complained when Michael Keaton was cast as Batman. People complained when Heath Ledger was cast as the Joker. There's been fanboy complaints. I myself have bitched for hours on this channel about the horrific Star Trek 09, Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek Beyond, and Star Trek Discovery and Picard seasons 1 and 2. I mean, I am not immune from these things, and there's a reason why. But if you look at this, so here are images of Namor from the comics, obviously, Joe Jusko's painting, and there is Tenoch Huerta playing Namor in Wakanda Forever. Now, I would say as far as Marvel Comics adaptations of characters go, you know, this is pretty close. I mean, I don't necessarily object to this one. I haven't seen it. But I did want to read some things. I had an article here that I wanted to share, and this article was published on Polygon on October 3rd. And here it is. Here's the article. Namor is more than just Black Panther's villain. This was written by Joshua Rivera on October 3rd. The latest trailer for Black Panther Wakanda Forever makes it clear war is coming. Namor, Tenoch Huerta, the film's antagonist, is rushing in like a tidal wave at Wakanda's darkest hour. It's an echo of a long-lived comic book rivalry between Black Panther and Namor. And while the shape of the story will be necessarily different, the reasons for a Black Panther sequel featuring Namor remain just as compelling. He's not just a villain. He's something more. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, director Ryan Coogler explains the MCU version of Namor is a little different from his comics counterpart. His kingdom is not Atlantis, but Talokan, a creation original to Wakanda Forever, inspired by Mayan culture and intended to be similar to Wakanda, a mythical nation of riches hidden in plain sight. The film deals with a lot of things, but one of them is foils, people who exist in contrast. But there's a thread of similarity, Coogler told EW. It's a quote that underlines what makes Namor the perfect Black Panther villain. He is, in many ways, T'Challa's equal and opposite, the sovereign leader of an unconquered people, fiercely determined to protect it from the outside world. But while in the first Black Panther, T'Challa eventually learned it was time to change his country's ways, it seems Namor and Talokan may not have yet gone through that growth. This also echoes T'Challa and Namor's relationship in the comics. Comics Namor, sometimes called the Submariner, has a long and complicated history, but his conflict with the Black Panther stems from the simple fact that makes them such compelling rivals. They're not superheroes. They're kings. Namor and the Black Panther operate on an entirely different level than most other characters in the Marvel Universe. They're dedicated to their people first and foremost, and all other causes second. This often puts them at odds with characters that would be their allies otherwise. The Avengers for T'Challa, the X-Men for Namor. Comics Namor is a mutant, which is interesting given how the MCU has started using that word, and gives their actions wider ramifications for the world at large. Tallulah, you have to sit and be quiet. I'm sorry, someone's going to go, Rob, it's unprofessional for you to do a YouTube show with your dogs barking. That is true, but you tell her to shut the fuck up, because I certainly can't. She wants my attention. Simply put, when one of these characters enter a story, that story just gets bigger. The best storytellers in comics lean into this. Writer Jonathan Hickman's long tenure on Avengers, and especially New Avengers, deals with the feud between T'Challa and Namor at length. The MCU version of this story, sadly, will have to take a slightly different tack, with the tragic loss of Chadwick Boseman, and by extension, T'Challa. However, all of that storytelling weight is still there. Wakanda is bigger than one person, and whoever steps in to bear the mantle of Black Panther will also have to step up to face Namor and put warring philosophies about what sort of person a leader should be to the test, with the pride of each nation at their back. Black Panther and Namor have always been more complicated than good and evil, right and wrong. To them, saving the world isn't enough. Saving people, their identity, and their indelible mark on the world is really what matters. Now, here's the thing. Oh, Tallulah, you have to stop. Oops. Here's the thing that I would say. We now live in a world where a lot of our beloved IP is being just raked over the coals, and worse, by creators that are basically essentially taking a job. Now, you can't blame them. And a lot of creators want to put their indelible mark on something. And I completely understand why they want to do those things. That's what creators do. Now, a lot of people would say, okay, if I want somebody to take over Star Trek, I want somebody to have a working knowledge of the Star Trek franchise. And one of the frustrating things with me as a fan is a lot of the people they hire to take over these franchises, whether it's Star Wars, Doctor Who, Lord of the Rings, take your pick, know a lot less about the franchises than the very audiences they're making these new properties for. And that puts them at a disadvantage, and it pisses us off because here's what I want most of all from my entertainment. I want a sense of authorship, first and foremost. I want a sense that I am getting something that the director, the writer, the artist, whomever, is creating something that they themselves have a great grasp of. And they're going to give me a story, a tale, something that makes it worth my while to consume this, to stick it in my imagination. And if I can see initially or right off the bat that this creator or creators, group of creators, has nothing to offer me, I tune out and I get angry because I wonder, how did these people get the jobs that they have? And we see that, and I feel the frustration. And a lot of the time, I mean, people think that when I like something that I'm immediately shilling for corporate interests. Look, I'll tell you, I love Moon Knight. I love the MCU. I was really looking forward to a Moon Knight show. The first screenplay I ever wrote was a Moon Knight screenplay when I was in high school. Ultimately, I hated Moon Knight. I hated the TV series Moon Knight. Loved Oscar Isaac's performance, but I thought every element that they leaned into in Moon Knight was wrong. The basis of what Moon Knight started as and what Moon Knight was for decades was not in the show. They leaned into a more recent iteration of Moon Knight because I understand that it was interesting to talk about things like schizophrenia and mental illness, and I understand that, which isn't necessarily a bad impulse, but that's what you do with the character later. The whole interesting part about Moon Knight was, what if Batman had multiple secret identities? That's basically what Moon Knight. And Moon Knight was much more of a 40s noir type villain that had a romantic, a girlfriend. And when I watched what they leaned into, and when I'm watching Egyptian gods fighting over human souls over the pyramids of Giza, I'm like, what the fuck is this? So I feel the pain. Now, Dave Cullen made a really interesting video about where the MCU is that he dropped a couple of days ago that I thought was actually very astute. And the fact that the first 23 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies were very focused, part of the Infinity Saga, and even when they weren't the best, they were still pretty good. Yes, even Captain Marvel, which I enjoyed. Is Captain Marvel great? No. But as fantasy films go, if you look at it in the pantheon of all kinds of science fiction, fantasy, and horror films, it's not bad. Is it lower tier Marvel? Indeed it is. So here's the thing. When adapting something like Namor, and man, everybody, it's very interesting because fandom, especially when you go on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter a lot, people throw the same thing at me. I'll mention something about Namor or the trailer dropping, and I'll get like 20 people who send the same thing to me. Where's Namor? Where's Atlantis? As if they were the first people to ever think of it. If I can tell you every person who sent me the old man yelling at clouds meme on Twitter, thinking it's the first time anyone sent it to me, I'd be rich. I'd have all the Hot Toys figures I want. But anyway, you have to take your fandom, and you also have to apply an understanding of the real world and the challenges that are facing creators. Look, if creators fall flat on their face, by all means, let's go after them. Do I like Rings of Power? No. I wanted to like it, but after 7 episodes, I really don't understand. I mean, I see what they're doing, but is it worth our time? That's quite debatable. But that's not what this show is about. When I look at what someone like Ryan Coogler, and from Fruitvale Station to Creed to Black Panther, and now Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Ryan Coogler has earned my trust. He's had 3 films I quite enjoyed. The fact that what balls that kid had going to Sylvester Stallone saying he had an idea for a Rocky movie. And not only did he have an idea for a Rocky movie, he had an idea for a Rocky movie where Rocky was a supporting character. That alone, and the Critical Drinker and I, we don't see eye to eye on Creed. We've talked about it. And by the way, I really enjoy Drinker's story analysis. But he actually has a lot of reasons why he didn't like Creed nearly as much as I did, and they're all valid, I have to say. He's a smart cookie when it comes to analyzing stories and what makes stories work and what makes stories not work. I happen to like Creed. Did I think Black Panther was the end-all, be-all? I did not. But I did really like Black Panther. It wasn't even top-tier Marvel for me. I understand the representation meant a lot to a lot of people, but I still thought it was really good. And I really liked the representation of T'Challa and T'Chaka and all of Wakanda in beginning in Civil War onward. I think they've done a tremendous job with all the characters, whether it's Okoye, whether it's Shuri, Ramonda. I love the depiction of that, and I'm incredibly excited for Wakanda Forever to see what they do. Is it the Namor that we know and love from the comics? No. But understanding why they had to make the changes they made, I'm much more interested to see what a filmmaker that I trust will do with those things. It could be very, very interesting. I'm withholding judgment till I actually see the movie. I always think that's prudent. You can have initial reactions, sure, but if something, I wait until it's done and I've experienced it. Then if it's terrible, I'll be the first person to say it's terrible. And I think things that are terrible are pretty self-evident. I don't like to get into arguments with people that, like, for instance, I love Andor. I love the storytelling in Andor. It feels like I'm watching a TV series about World War II, a World War II underground. I'm really enjoying all of it. Now, is it the kind of Star Wars that people know and are used to? No, it isn't. But Andor, when I watch it, I feel authorship. Tony Gilroy, his brother Dan, and his other brother John. Dan Gilroy wrote and directed Nightcrawler. His brother John's editing Andor. I feel authorship when I'm watching Andor. I feel that the people that are making Andor are giving me something that they've thought a lot about. Every frame of that has been carefully plotted, carefully considered, carefully understood. I wish I could say the same about a show like Book of Boba Fett, which I can't. I think half of Mandalorian is that way, because you've got what Dave Filoni did in his animated shows, working with this old Western sort of have gun will travel thing being put together, and I enjoy it. But in my mind, Andor is the kind of Star Wars show as an adult I'd always wished for, but never got. How I wish that team could have written and directed the prequels. If we had that kind of thought, that kind of adult approach, those could have been films for the ages. But we got what we got, so I can't complain. But in terms of Wakanda Forever, I have to say, I'm really interested to see what they've done with Namor and what they've done with the Talokan Empire. Is it an empire? The Talokan hegemony? The Talokan Confederacy? What do we call it? I don't know. I guess I have to wait and see the film. But I do think that it's important for us as fans because look, bitching and moaning about, look back on how many people hated Heath Ledger as the Joker until they saw. The funny thing about that, and why I think that's a great example, is there's no way we could have even have understood what you might not have liked the look of it, the scarring of the face, the war paint. But until you saw Heath Ledger's portrayal of that character, there was no way to understand what it was he was doing. My friend David Irwin was on set because he worked for DC doing product design and things like that. So he would do photo shoots, he would direct photo shoots for things like merchandising and stuff. So he was on set watching what Heath Ledger was doing, and he tried to explain it to me once. And I'm like, so I don't, what? And it wasn't until I saw The Dark Knight for the first time at some media screening in IMAX, I was blown away. I'm like, oh my God. And people can't, isn't the world a much better place because we as fans have that portrayal? So I'm holding off judgment, and I'm not going to make an appeal to everybody, but I would just say that when it comes to Wakanda Forever, we are getting the two things that I want. We're getting authorship. We're getting an auteurist vision. Writer-director Ryan Coogler being brought back after making $1 billion grossing, Academy Award nominated Best Picture in Black Panther, coming back and having to surmount something that I don't wish on anyone but the loss of his friend and his lead actor. And he is tasked with the choice and the idea of bringing back the land of Wakanda and his all that incredible cast of actors and making something worthy of the first film and introducing Namor and making this all work. I mean, I don't know how it's going to be. It might not work. It might be a major misfire. It looks pretty good to me. Now, and we'll see. We'll see. But I get all this vitriol thrown at me, and I'm like, hey, it might be bad. It might be. But we should wait and see, because we're getting authorship. We're getting somebody who's considered, just read anything what Ryan Coogler said in interviews about this stuff. Now, before I read this other article that I wanted to read, I want to jump in. A lot of people have been firing in super chats and tips, and I would like to read some of them. And by the way, yes, I do have letters. So first of all, Man writes in and says, my man, Rob, it has been so long. Yeah, it's been a while since I have done a Robservations, and I apologize. I want to do more of those. Morgan Holmes just sends in a $10 super chat. Morgan, thank you. Leandro Urena sends in a super chat, super sticker, right back at you. And then we have some tips that have been fired in. A Silly Goose says, bruh, I went and saw Terrifier 2 last night. I was supposed to go with Taylor. I went and saw Terrifier 2 last night, and it was bananas. I watched the first Terrifier on Tuesday and immediately bought my ticket to the second one. This movie has one of the most brutal scenes ever put to film. Art the Clown is a true menace. Terrifier was pretty hardcore. And, you know, I was looking for another a Terrifier 2 screening, and I can't find him anywhere. I'm definitely going to go if I can find it, because the brutality, hey, I want to see some brutal horror. I watched the new Hellraiser. I really didn't love it. I thought the first half was a little slow, but it was really interesting. It added to the lore, really respectable. I loved the new Cenobites were great. It was a great updating, a really interesting furthering of the lore. And I felt that it wasn't, the new Pinhead does not replace Doug Bradley. The new Pinhead succeeded Doug Bradley. And if I might hark back to what Spock said to Valeris, I don't intend for you to replace me. I intend for you, or Valeris says, I could never replace you, only succeed you. I like that. Sister Harlow sends a tips of $50 contribution to your next hot toy. Well, Sister Harlow, my God, that is very generous, and I will. There are so many hot toys coming out. The Black Widow, a new Black Widow just dropped. My God. So yeah, you know, I finally was able to get a Maria Hill. I used points and got my Maria Hill too, because I have Agent Coulson, I have Nick Fury. I finally have a Maria Hill coming, which I never got. Oh, Maria Hill. John Suntress from the Word Balloon podcast. If you don't watch the Word Balloon podcast, you should. John does a great job. John says, that was me with the Lower Decks thoughts, also holding my Namor MCU thoughts till I see Wakanda Forever. He's my favorite Marvel anti-hero. Read Chip Zdarsky's Invaders miniseries from a couple of years back for a great modern Namor Cap OG Human Torch story. Ooh, I'll read that. And John goes on to say, my Lower Decks post. I've been disappointed by this show's lack of humor and originality, but I've enjoyed the last 3 episodes. Rutherford's backstory, very interesting. Starfleet career fair, funny. The DS9 episode, genuine. And Peanut Hamper, good parody. Thoughts? Yeah, I've liked... Look, here's the thing about Lower Decks. Lower Decks is fine. You know, here's the thing that I have a problem with in general, and this is my own prejudice against certain kinds of creators. And this goes in with a lot of people that are from the comedy persuasion. It's very hard for people to look at Star Trek and take it seriously. And I feel that Mike McMahon is a very funny guy. They have I prefer my Star Trek serious. And I've said this before on the show. I don't look at the Mugatu, which is the white ape from A Private Little War with the horn on top. I don't look at a Mugatu and laugh at it. I look at a Mugatu and say that was a creative way to maximize. They used something they probably got on the studio lot or rented it. They needed a creature. They didn't have the money to make something new, so they had a white ape with a big horn on its head. And the portrayal of that ape was dangerous. It almost killed Kirk, but a lot of people, of course, look at it as being a goofy thing in Star Trek. And to me, it's easy to look at something like the Mugatu or the neural parasites from Operation Annihilate, the fake throw up, that sticks on your back. People make fun of that stuff all the time. I do not. And I understand it's hard for people to go back. So there's a lot of wink, wink, nudge, nudge in Lower Decks that to me is not necessarily the most creative thing in the world. It's easy pickings. It's low-hanging fruit. And I know science fiction, fantasy, and genre fans in general love their silly humor. And I get it. I don't begrudge Lower Decks. It's not in my head canon of quote-unquote real Star Trek. It's a workplace comedy set in the Star Trek universe, and it's fine. I like it. Mattuine says, liked the blink and you miss it Q mark, the dot in the corner of the screen in Werewolf by Night. Nice touch, giving the film movie vibe. Well, those are called cigarette burns, and those signified real changeovers for projectionists. So when you saw that little thing that comes, it was called the cigarette burn, but they did that in Werewolf by Night. What I'm happy they didn't do is add a bunch of scratches a la Grindhouse. But it was nice to see that. And so what they used those for is when one came on, it would come on twice. When one came on, you knew it was coming. The second time, that's when you would start, because there were two projectors. There used to be two projectors in movie theaters and the reels they were like 10 minutes long until they got platters, and they were 20 minutes long. And they would literally have one projector, and when they had the changeover, you turn the other projector on, and that's what those cigarette burns were for. Mark Cormier says, yo, Rob, big fan. Will the Fox X-Men be in Secret Wars? I would imagine so. They don't have enough characters to do Secret Wars. They're gonna have to throw everyone with the kitchen sink in there. I think it was like Den of Nerds was doing an interesting speculative piece the other day. I was listening to it in my car on the way home yesterday about what they were gonna do with the Fox X-Men characters, and that would be sort of their last hurrah, which I could see. And then after Secret Wars, then we see what happens with the MCU X-Men. I would imagine they would be. So, good question, Mark. Paul Ade says, yo, Rob, don't you think that Gilroy should be commissioned to make an Old Republic trilogy or a post-Rise of Skywalker trilogy? Yes. Give the Gilroy family, John, Tony, and Dan, give them Star Wars. They've proven it. But you know what? There's a lot of people that don't like the approach to Andor. They want more of the pulp, serial-esque sci-fi that they got in the original Star Wars, which I understand. But the thing is, Star Wars storytelling had to evolve, and I think they've done a great job doing that with Andor. So here's something I wanted to read to you. I have another article that I want to read to you. It's an older article. And this article is from Movie Maker magazine, and it's written by Dan Mervish, and it was written 9 years ago on October 10th, 2013. It's almost 9 years old, and it is an article called Adapt or Die, 13 Steps to Adapting a movie into something else. Well, actually, hang on a second. Adapting a film from something else is the official title of the article. And this is really interesting. We're not special. We're not brilliant. We never were. So says David Harbour's character in my film, Between Us. And he's right. Most of us probably started as writer-directors by necessity. Remember, this is from filmmaking. This is from Filmmaker magazine. So it's being written for filmmakers. But at a certain point in a filmmaker's career, and of course, if you have an actual career, you will eventually cease to be a filmmaker and become instead a film's maker. You will realize you're probably not as brilliant or talented as you once thought you were. If you are indeed a genius screenwriter, you're probably better off writing scripts for Hollywood and actually getting paid to write anyway. But if you want to keep directing, you'll realize that you have neither the time, inclination, nor skill to keep writing your own original material all the time. And that's where adaptation comes in. But where to begin? Here we go. And again, this is Dan Mervish in Filmmaker Magazine from 9 years ago. These are 13 rules of steps to adapting things. And I think there's a lot of people in Hollywood working today who should remember this. You're not brilliant. To assume that every indie filmmaker is as equally adept at writing sparkling dialogue in an original story as they are at directing actors, choosing camera angles, or cutting a scene is rationally unrealistic, especially to do so on every film every time. It's no wonder that barely 15% of Hollywood films are based on truly original scripts, and even fewer directed by the sole writer. Step 1 is acceptance. You're no genius. You're in good company. The next step is to realize that you're not alone. Sure, Woody Allen can churn out a script every year, and Joel Swanberg can knock one out every month or two. It's certainly possible. But many, if not most, of your beloved auteur heroes have done adaptations or worked with other screenwriters on most of their films. Think about Robert Altman, Stanley Kubrick, Martin Scorsese, Hitchcock. Their best films were either adapted from books, plays, articles, or at the very least came from original screenplays from close collaborators. Meanwhile, their plates were plenty full focusing on directing their movies, and more often than not, producing them too. But on an indie, no-budget film, how can you possibly do what Hollywood does every day? The first step is to figure out who the gatekeepers are to the good material. I'm not going to read this. Find a play. You can find a play. This I love. Books are just screenplays with adjectives. Beyond plays, don't forget novels. All you need to do is cut out all of those pesky adjectives and interior monologues, and presto, you've got a screenplay. Easy peasy, but getting the rights to a good book is the hard part. One of the least known breed of agents in Hollywood has got to be the elusive book-to-film agent. All the big agencies have them. Usually, a boutique book agent or publisher in New York isn't the one dealing directly with the studios and Hollywood production companies. And that's kind of more inside baseball. But I really like that idea of cutting out all the adjectives. Number 5, develop a relationship with the original author. No matter what kind of deal you strike with an agent, it will always be a better deal and, more importantly, a better project in the end if you've developed a strong relationship with the original author. I know one filmmaker who's trying to secure a 15-year-old newspaper article from a writer that she personally knows well, but the agency that reps the newspaper is telling the filmmaker they won't even start talking for less than a $10,000 option. For an indie film, this is obviously a non-starter. But if the writer is personally motivated to get the film made, they can pressure the agents from their end. Now, this is more of the business side, but I love the idea with develop a relationship with the original author. If the original author is dead, develop a relationship with the original material. Know the material. Learn the material. Do you know why Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, was such a great film? Famously, Nicholas Meyer, the director, who does not even have credit for the screenplay, Jack Sowards does, didn't know anything about Star Trek. But he was a smart guy. He was very well educated. He understood that Star Trek took a lot of its cues from the nautical adventures of Horatio Hornblower. Nicholas Meyer sat down and immersed himself in Star Trek episodes. And so did writer Eric Jedrinson, who actually wrote a sequel movie to Star Trek Enterprise about the beginning salvos of the Romulan War. And it was called Star Trek The Beginning. He didn't know anything about Star Trek either. But as a smart guy, he went and watched Enterprise, got himself steeped in the films or the episodes, steeped in the lore, and wrote a very cool script that should be adapted, quite frankly. Why they don't, I don't know. But get to know the original author. Get to know all of their work. Use their experience to your benefit. One advantage of using source material is that there's already a body of reaction to that work. You can read reviews of the book or the play. If there was consistent criticism, you can address the underlying problems. If there was consistent praise about a certain element, then don't mess with us. And I think that is great advice. Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. There are thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, or even millions of pages of analysis on these things. Go read them. Figure out why these things worked. Figure out why people liked them. And the thing is, when you're adapting something, it's not your job to come in and change it and bend it to your will. You have to still honor the original material. Number 7, connect with the material. If you're going to spend 6 weeks producing a film, 3 weeks shooting it, 2 years in post, and another 3 years promoting it, you'd better relate to it personally. With all the inevitable challenges of making the movie, you've got to have an emotional stake in the script, or at some point you will get frustrated and abandon it. You need to make it your baby as much as it was the original writers. Your cast and crew will see this too. They don't want to work for free for a director who's just going through the motions, and they don't want to work for free or paid a lot of money and work for a director who's just going through the motions. Studios must learn that they have to hire people that love this material. Otherwise, we get things that aren't so great. Then they say, don't call it opening up. Remember, you're adapting a play into a film. You're not just filming a play. When you say you're doing an adaptation, most people ask, how are you opening up the play? But really what they should be asking is, how are you going to make it more cinematographic? I reckon there are 3 broad techniques that differentiate a play from a movie. This is true of comics. Comics are 4-color fantasies, one-dimensional on the page. You know, people forget Wolverine's... How tall is Wolverine? 5 feet tall in the comics. Hugh Jackman is over 6 feet. When Hugh Jackman was cast as Wolverine, I can't tell you how much bitching and moaning and complaining there was about Wolverine. Now when you think about Wolverine on screen, no one wants a 5-foot Wolverine anymore. I mean, it could work out. I think Taron Egerton could be a great Wolverine. He was Elton John, and he was in Elton John and Rocket Man, and of course he was in Kingsman. And Daniel Radcliffe, people laugh at that, but he's a great actor, and he could be that small, ferocious Wolverine. But now, even the film-going audience for the last 22 years, and in 2024 it'll be 24 years when Wolverine comes back, we have that strapping, tall Hugh Jackman, that hunka burning love image of a man. That's something that fandom was not down with when he was first cast, which is kind of funny when you think about it now. But when you're adapting things, again, location. Obviously, you've got the opportunity to move your dialogue scenes from a play or a comic into exciting locations. You can shoot scenes in cars, restaurants, airplanes, wherever your heart desires. But presumably, one reason you picked a play or a comic or a book to adapt in the first place is that it would be easy to shoot, not necessarily as an indie film, but as a film. Editing, because by the way, in this article he's talking about his specific movie that he made, but I think these rules for adaptation are good. Editing, micro and macro. The first act of the play of Between Us took place in a Midwestern house, and the second act was 2 years later in a New York apartment. Well, when you're adapting something, I ask you, when it comes to Namor, does it really matter that the character of Namor is an exact translation of the character in the comics? Where was Atlantis first located? Underneath Antarctica. Then it was moved up off the shore of the Pacific Northwest. Does it really matter? If Namor's entire backstory is changed to reflect a real-world location on Earth, call it the Talocan Empire, whatever it's called, is that really different? And it can add something that a movie translation could actually benefit from. As a matter of fact, I would say it gives Ryan Coogler as a filmmaker a lot more to play with than just a generic Atlantis. Because one, you're fighting against what Atlantis looks like in Aquaman. How does the MCU make their Atlantis different? By having a real world, a tether to a real civilization or real civilizations, Mesoamerica, and I'm going to have a guest on in 15 minutes to talk about representation. It is, I think it's a great idea. It gives you a lot to play with there. So that's a good thing. Putting the move in movies. You've got to make movies dynamic. And I think that I'll be honest. The nose accoutrements, the feathers, leaning into the ceremonial garb in Namor, from at least photographically right now, what we've seen pictures of, I'm not sold on it. It's a little goofy. Not going to lie. And I respect everyone's worry that it's going to be shitty. I totally understand it. However, I am willing to trade until I see it. Again, show it to me on camera first. I am willing to hold judgment, withhold judgment until I see it. Because I think it could go either way. It could look goofy or not. But I also ask everybody to look at the past 29 Marvel MCU films. Without exception, their costuming of their characters has been impeccable. The best superhero costumes we've ever seen. They've managed to keep... I mean, I'll tell you something. One of my favorite costumes ever was in Captain America, the First Avenger. Captain America, they leaned into the classic comic look with his USO tour thing, but when he finally went out into the field, they gave him a very unique, like, call it a jumpsuit, call it battle fatigues, whatever you want to call it. It was recognizably Captain America, but it also worked. It felt like, okay, if he was going to war in World War II, it looked correct. I bought into it. Thor's costume has always looked incredible. The Black Panther costume, the Captain America costumes, the iterations, the Iron Man armor, Black Widow. They've done such a good job with their costuming. And Wakanda Forever, the Dora Milaje. I refuse to believe that they're going to let Namor look goofy. It looks kind of goofy in photographs. I grant you that. But I would say let's wait until we see. Number 12, and I think this is very important. Use your source material's pedigree. There's a reason Hollywood likes to adapt material. It's easier to get them made and get them seen once they've been made. If you have a hit Broadway play or a best-selling novel or a big comic book, you'll find it easier to get investors, hire actors, and sell your movie than if it was just an original writer-director wank job. It really doesn't even matter if any of these people have heard of it, seen, or even read the source material. Just by virtue of the fact that it was made once before means that there must be some validity to it. That's why people like IP. That is a very simple reason why IP is looked at first. If it already came out in one other medium, that means somebody already liked it enough to make it some kind of a hit that it's there to be adapted in the first place. Unfortunately, Hollywood used to do original stuff and adaptations, but now it's all about IP because people know less. The people that work in Hollywood have read less and know less about source material than they ever have. Trust me, I know. I go into meetings, I talk about books, I talk about TV shows. People look at me like, huh? What? They haven't heard of these things. Even when you're talking about horror novels, I have a lot of dark fantasy and horror novels I read from the 80s. I have hundreds of them. I used to think that anybody who's interested in horror had read all these books. When you bought Fangoria magazine, when I did, I got every issue. The first thing I would turn to is Nightmare Library because I took books as seriously as I took movies. When Stephen King's books came out in the early 80s, I was the first person to go down and get them. Graham Masterton horror novels, James Herbert, you name it. I would read all of that shit. I figured everybody would remember that. Nobody remembers that. Nobody's read those books. Except when Grady Hendrix' book Paperbacks from Hell came out. Now everyone's collecting those books and you can't get them anymore, which is too bad. But hey, at least people are reading them. And finally, about adaptations, don't apologize for your source material. That means creators, if you're lucky enough to work on, say, Star Trek or Doctor Who, take it seriously. Don't think you're going to reinvent the wheel. Honor what it is you're working on. Don't apologize for your source material. Nearly as annoying as too faithful adaptations are the ones that stray too far from their source material. You don't want critics who never read the book or saw the play sniping that the movie's not as good as the original. And if your original has a fan base, you can't risk alienating them. You adapted the film from your original for a host of reasons, so don't leave the audience guessing. I like tight, talky dialogue. I like that there are 4 main characters in the play that I adapted into a movie. I like that there aren't a lot of locations, but the ones we do have look great. And I'm proud to say that my movie, Between Us, was adapted from a play. Well, he's right. You've got to make sure, everybody, all creators have to make sure that if you're adapting something that has a fan base, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the IP to do the best adaptation possible, and that means finding out as much about what you're adapting as possible. If not, you wind up with some garbage like Star Trek Into Darkness, which was not satisfying for anyone, unfortunately. Let's see. Senpaigar sends in a super chat and says, Star Wars has been my favorite franchise since I was 5. I'm now 32. I saw the original trilogy before the prequels, and that was my intro into the universe. I am just loving Andor. I wish Boba Fett had this tone. Senpaigar, you and me both. Can you imagine if we got a book of Boba Fett that was a crime thriller about Boba Fett deciding to take over the crime syndicate, the void left after the death of Jabba the Hutt, and you made it a show that was like Andor? Maybe you could speed it up and make it give the Star Wars fans the more of the pulp, serialized action that they would want. But with that kind of, I mean, it would be great. I think it would be awesome if they were to do that. I really wish somebody would. I think it would be amazing. Now, before Roberto Suarez gets here, I've got letters. As people know, maybe you haven't watched the show before, I read letters on this show from viewers. Now, if you want to send me a letter, it's free of charge. You can go to postgeeksingularity.com. That's postgeeksingularity.com, right underneath me. And you can click on, there's a click there. There's a link, send me a letter. And here's a letter from Joel. Hello, Mr. Burnett. Firstly, allow me to express my appreciation. I've been enjoying your various shows over the past 3 years or so, especially Robservations. So many times I've found myself agreeing with you, especially about Star Trek, to the point that I often mutter to myself your expression, you and I park our shuttlecraft in the same shuttle bay, Robert. Secondly, I need your input. I've heard that Picard Season 3 is bringing back Tasha Yar, and I'm worried. For the past, I would say 5 years or so, I've been working on one of many Star Trek movies in my head. These will never see the light of day, I know this. One of these is a cast reunion that also brings back Tasha. My story includes Armus, the creature that killed her, and the species that created him. I call it Star Trek Dark Angels. Seeing as how you know what Picard Season 3 is about, I would very much like to get from you, just to assuage my mind, a simple yay or nay as to whether it has these elements as well. And if you're interested, I could send you a full synopsis of Dark Angels to get your much valued by me critique of the story as well as a fellow Trek enthusiast. In any case, thank you for your attention and keep the wonderful Robservations coming. Joel Meyer. Joel, first of all, I have to say I can't look at your idea, only because there are people that I talk to who actually work on Star Trek and people that I know who work on other comics and things like that. And if any element showed up in something that you told me that I casually mentioned, and I would never want your story to and I have a big mouth. So if I like your story, I'd probably tell somebody, and I wouldn't want them to borrow those ideas. So, but I keep, you might want to submit it as a comic to IDW or write it as fan fiction somewhere. It's always a good exercise. But as far as Tasha Yar is concerned, I don't think showrunner Terry Matalas would be upset if I told you that Tasha Yar and Armus do not appear in Star Trek Picard Season 3. I can promise you that. So, yeah, I hope that's okay. Here's a letter that comes from our friend Kenny Crayley Jr. Hello, Rob and members of the Post-Geek Singularity. I'm back again with another letter, and I'm here to talk about my favorite comic book superhero of all time, the Man of Steel himself, Superman. Superman Clark Kent is my favorite superhero of all time. I love Christopher Reeve in the first and second classic Superman movies, Smallville, and currently Superman and Lois, plus Superman in the DC animated universe. My problem with the recent Superman films in the modern era is I don't feel Superman the character, and Warner Brothers and WB would not let Henry Cavill be Superman, whereas the CW let Tyler Hoechlin be Superman and be that beacon of hope the world needs him to be. Also, the newer Superman films are too dark for my taste. I want a hopeful, bright, and optimistic Superman on film, and I hope the newer films get back to that. Also, I want to see newer villains for Superman to go up against instead of using Lex Luthor or General Zod all the time. Superman's adventures in comic books are epic in scale, and his family is amazing. Plus, his supporting cast is some of the best in comic book history. The modern films have barely begun to scratch the surface of what Superman is and could be. Yes, the Snyderverse of the DCEU has its fans, myself included, but I just want a new Superman film to make me fall in love with the character again, like Superman and Lois on TV has been, or Smallville was back in the day. Like Christopher Reeve once said, Superman is a friend. That's what people really need most. They don't need a strong arm or a vigilante force. America was founded on the virtues of a helping hand, and that's the heart of Superman. The genuine love of people, and that you always know he's your friend. Well, Rob, those are my thoughts. What are yours, and how would you fix Superman on film? Take care, Rob, and keep up with the super amazing work. Sincerely, longtime watcher and listener, Kenny Crayley Jr. from Ohio. Well, Kenny, that's a nice letter. First of all, thank you for that. I think that the character of Superman inherently is hopeful, is optimistic. After all, he stands for truth, justice, and the American way. Of course, they can't say that now because they make movies for a global audience, so you have to say that he's for everyone. I think an optimistic view of Superman, here's the problem. On one hand, if you made an optimistic Superman, that's great, but you still have to have him. The modern age requires that you give him somebody to fight. One of the criticisms people had about, say, Superman Returns was that Superman just picks up a big rock and flings it into space at the end. That you really need antagonist. But what's interesting is Man of Steel leans heavily into the fact that, well, what would a battle between two Kryptonians actually look like in a city post 9/11? It ain't going to be pretty. It's not going to be funny either. I mean, I love Man of Steel. I appreciate why you don't. I like it as a science fiction first contact story and a superhero story. But in that movie, Superman is not Superman yet. He is becoming Superman. That's why the movie's called Man of Steel and not Superman. I hope if the rumors are true and Henry Cavill does have a deal to come back and play Superman again, I think they're going to lean more into a more hopeful, more bright Superman. And if he is indeed in Black Adam, it'll be interesting to see that interaction. I mean, the screenings out of Mexico seem to say that he is. And of course, Dwayne Johnson certainly wasn't being subtle on his Instagram feed teasing Superman. So let's see what he is or isn't going to do. But I'm with you. I think that a hopeful Superman could be great. By the way, Eucalyptus sends in a super chat and says, King Rob. I don't know about that. But hey, if you want to call me a king, who am I to say no? But yeah. Now, we're going to move into a different part of tonight's show. And I'm going to bring on, you know him, you love him. If you're a member of this channel, we do member chats. And Roberto Suarez runs them. He is an educator from Portland, Oregon. He's also a very astute fan of genre cinema, and he knows his stuff and has a lot of great takes. Hopefully he'll have some hot takes as well that we're all going to scream and yell, because after all, we're getting into a later time of night, and on this show, you never know what happens, whether it's Midnight Musings. Who knows what is going to happen on this show late at night? Because by God, lately, I mean, I've seen some crazy shit happen, and we will be later on. We will be opening up the show when Roberto has to go to bed, whenever that is. I hope I spelled your Roberto. Is your last name spelled Suarez? All right. Well, everyone, please welcome Roberto Suarez to this episode of Robservations, all the way from Portland, Oregon. Roberto,
from
welcome.
Portland.
Welcome.
Hello, Rob.
How are you?
I'm doing great. I just kind of, when I saw this week's topic for your show, I was like, hey, I should let Rob know that I'm around tonight. So,
all right.
See if you want me to jump in here.
Now, I first of all, how are your relatives that you have in Puerto Rico?
So far, everybody's been okay. It's difficult to say something like, well, thankfully they are in an area of the island where the impact wasn't as severe, but there was really severe impact in other areas of the island. So it's kind of bittersweet to say, yeah, my family's okay, but a lot of people are hurting. So they were without power for an extended period of time. I actually haven't had a chance to check in with them this week, but in Puerto Rico, you lose power frequently under the best circumstances. So with a hurricane, it's, exacerbated tenfold, right?
Yeah.
But there were some areas that were pretty badly hit, and the one area that we're kind of waiting to hear on is my stepfather has a farm in a property in an area that was badly hit, so we're kind of waiting to see the status of that.
Well, let's jump into this.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of talk, obviously, about representation in movies. Now, for me, I have always believed that having as a fan of world cinema, I grew up watching a lot of Japanese films, Chinese films, French films, Russian films. I didn't watch as many Indian movies as I probably should have, but I've always been interested. People always talk about, well, there's not enough like representation in film. I'm like, well, really? That's because people aren't watching foreign cinema, so they're not what they want. What they want is the American version of their representation.
Right. Yeah, I've always made the comment that we're the only country that has a category for best foreign film, right? Everywhere else is just film.
Yeah, well, it's so funny. I mean, I didn't understand. I've said this before, but 4 years ago, I was in South Korea working on a documentary, and I was very acutely aware of, there's American military bases, but when you're walking around Seoul, I'm a loud, boisterous American. South Korea is not. It's a very homogenous place. There's not a lot of people that aren't Korean there. So I would walk into stores. There were eyes on me. People were looking at me like, "What am I going to do next?" And I'd never felt that before in my life. And it really gave me a lot of insight into, now I know what it's like to truly be a minority that looks different. Yeah. We don't think that but I mean, I was acutely aware of it. Like, I couldn't walk. It didn't matter where I was going to get some food or walk into a convenience store. I mean, all eyes were on me.
Right.
Like, am I going to do something crazy?
Yeah.
And it really made me reassess my understanding of what representation means. Now, here's the thing. Like anyone else, we now live in a time where we're overcompensating for everything.
Sure.
And what I think no one likes is when representation is forced on something. Like, I'll give you an example of, a lot of people don't know this, but if you go back and you think about The Shawshank Redemption, one of the greatest movies ever made. People can't imagine that Morgan Freeman is not red. In the original story that Stephen King wrote, that's in his 1982 book, Different Seasons, the original story is called Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, and the character of Red is white.
He's called Red because he's a redhead.
Yeah, and nowadays, if Shawshank Redemption was made today, and word came out of the cast about the casting, people would bitch and moan and complain and talk about, no one gave a shit when that movie came out in 1994. As a matter of fact, I can't, and the reason that Frank Darabont cast Morgan Freeman in that role is because Morgan Freeman made it his own. You can't imagine anyone else that in that role of Red. And they even keep Andy Dufresne says to Red, "Why do they call you Red?" And he looks and he goes, "Maybe it's because I'm Irish." Didn't even change the line.
Exactly.
And for me, I used to read that story. I read it every year on the holidays because it's only like 100 pages in the book. I love that story. I was a huge fan of that story. I'd read it probably 20 times. For the 15 times the movie came out or whatever. I never even thought about Morgan Freeman being a black dude in this role. As soon as you hear his voice and with the voiceover, you're locked in. So let me ask you, when it comes to representation, obviously you're Hispanic, you're from Puerto Rico, you're a fluent Spanish speaker, you're from Puerto Rico, you're not even native born American. Even though Puerto Rico makes kind of as you
Puerto
are.
Rico, you are native.
You are a U.S. citizen. Yeah. But you still consider yourself Hispanic, right?
Yeah, very much so. Very much consider myself Puerto Rican. I mean, that when I'm asked demographically what I would describe myself as, I would say Puerto Rican first and foremost.
So, and you're a genre fan. You love comic books. You love science fiction, Star Wars, Doctor Who, all this. How did you feel when you found out that Ryan Coogler and the MCU was going to change Namor and give him Mesoamerican roots, steep obviously the Talocan, it comes from the whole Aztec god of rain, and the idea that the souls of the dead go to this rain kingdom or whatever. I thought it was pretty neat. What did you think? Did you think it was it pandering? Did you feel that it was shoehorned into the mythos? How did you feel about it?
No, not at all. I mean, I thought it was a very interesting and creative choice to have this as an opportunity to like you say, you're always talking about the value of adapting, right? I mean, to take a character and adapt it for this version of the story. I mean, I see the MCU as yet another component of the multiverse of Marvel. The fact that Namor exists as this character in this iteration of the Marvel multiverse doesn't mean that it can't coexist with other versions we've seen before or versions that we'll see going forward.
Which they've done in What If, and they did Multiverse of Madness.
What If
and Loki.
And the histories and backgrounds of characters in the comic book world get reinvented and reinterpreted, every so many years. Salud for all sorts of...
Well, it's just Diet Coke, but hey.
Of reasons. It's okay.
Sober October, baby.
But the way I see it, to me, first and foremost, it's just the idea of a creative, fresh, new way to interpret a character. Is it the definitive version of the character? We don't know yet. I mean, the reality is there's just going to be, it's just another opportunity to try something different and to try something that brings cinematic focus to a, not just does it give an interesting background for the character by framing it within Latino Hispanic culture with a Latino actor, but to then expand our knowledge as viewers regarding Mesoamerican culture, which, I mean, when you think about it, how has Mesoamerican culture been depicted in cinema for the majority, for the last however history of Hollywood, right? But typically, it's the crazy natives hunting Indiana Jones down in some way, shape, or form. And
the Jovitos.
The Jovitos are
if
near,
only you
right?
spoke Jovitos.
Yeah, exactly. If only you spoke Jovitos.
Perhaps you could warn them.
Exactly. And like again, even when the last time that I think there was really kind of some focus given to Mesoamerican culture must have been like Mel Gibson's Apocalypto or something.
Which, by the way,
like
is an incredible film.
An incredible film, but I bet a lot of people probably didn't see it.
Sure.
A lot of people probably were turned off by the fact that it was all spoken in archaic language with subtitles, right? Even though they do an homage to Urban Cowboy. I mean to not to Urban Cowboy. Yeah, what's the movie? The Dustin Hoffman. I'm thinking of the Dustin Hoffman.
Midnight Cowboy.
Midnight Cowboy. They do an homage to Midnight Cowboy in that movie. But regardless, I'm kind of getting off that. But it's another way to kind of bring in a culture and a very rich culture and a very ancient culture and a culture that has had a huge impact, but in many ways has also kind of been overshadowed by the history of colonialism, right? And
Sure.
how things just kind of get disappeared and suppressed. And the reality, Rob, too, is there's precedent to do something like this. I mean, I remember growing up, one of the first projects I did for a social studies class was on Tenochtitlan, which was the Aztec city that was built on top of a lake. So there were civilizations in Mesoamerica that actually built cities that some could even interpret as a kind of Atlantis-like kind of place.
Yeah.
This existed in history.
Well, that's why I think Ryan Coogler probably looked into that, and that's why, for me, like I explained early on in the show, I love the idea of the Mesoamerican cultures maybe being ancient alien stomping grounds.
Right. There's always been affiliation with that.
Yeah, and the lines at Nazca, that look like landing strips, and then where did the Mayans go, and the Mayan calendar in 2012, right. And all that stuff.
And there's a great there's also been ruins found, within the last couple of decades. There is actually a lake in Guatemala called Lake Atitlan. I mean, it even sounds like Atlantis.
Well, yeah.
And there was a island in the middle of that lake that was basically what the Mayan cultures of the time considered kind of the center of their universe. It was like Mecca to the Mayans. It was a place of reverence where you would go and you would make a pilgrimage to. And it was destroyed by a volcano and sunk. The volcano erupted. It raised the water level, and literally the city, the whole island, went underwater. I mean, there's more factual basis for an Atlantis type civilization in Mesoamerican culture than there is for the actual Atlantis of mythology, right?
Right. And but I think what's so interesting is that's why Ryan Coogler went in that direction.
Totally.
And I give it up for him.
And what an opportunity, right? You could have taken the easy route and just gone with kind of like the Greek version, kind of Eurocentric version of an underwater city and an underwater civilization. But what a great opportunity to research this stuff and be like, wow, there's this rich culture that I could tap into, and thinking of it too in the context of putting it with contrast with Wakandan culture, right? So
that to me, here's where the adaptation point becomes interesting. Like you have these two super civilizations that have super science or whatever, and they've been hidden on the earth, and they're either in opposition, they have a long history together. I love all this stuff because of the rich storytelling opportunities. It wasn't somebody going, here's what I can't stand now in this day and age when it comes to representation. It feels like I hate performance activism. When people just come and they decide, oh, this is now the topic du jour, and let me show you how great I am. And it's all about me. This stuff is all about me. Let me show you how much of an activist and how aware and what an ally I am for you. I'm like, fuck that noise. You know what? If you're a true activist, you don't have to say you are. You just do your good works. And I feel like nowadays, because of social media, everybody wants their social. I certainly see it when people come after me on Twitter. They want to prove. I'm like, fuck that noise. I don't believe a word you're saying anyway. Yeah. And I feel that a lot of the representation that we're getting is disingenuous. Yeah. Whereas I feel, and the reason that the whole thing about what Ryan Coogler is doing with Wakanda Forever is I feel it's absolutely not disingenuous, that he's done his research and he found because I was curious if they would make Atlantis like I thought they would make it maybe Asian. Like somewhere like Polynesian in a way, whether it was a frothy mix of everything from Maori culture to, Vietnamese, Cambodian culture, whatever. And then Namor would be, you could cast a great Asian actor, something along those lines, which could have worked. It never occurred to me, because we don't think about Mesoamerican culture as being associated necessarily with the ocean. It's inland. Right. You think of the jungle. And I really liked like that in the new trailer when Namor he lands and the megalodon, the jaws, and that's where his throne is. I'm like, oh fuck yeah, dude, bring that shit on. I hope Hot Toys makes that throne like they made the throne of Wakanda.
And the reality too is, you're talking about your expectations for what Namor and Atlantis were going to be depicted like. Who knows what decisions were made because of kind of creative, needing to be creative around things like what was done with Aquaman already.
Well, that's Aquaman, what I was saying.
In many ways, is kind of. I mean, I even remember back when Momoa was cast as Aquaman. In my mind, I said he would make a better Namor than an Aquaman,
right?
Just because of his look and stuff, right?
Well, what I said is, I think one of the reasons is, if they were to depict Atlantis in the MCU, if they had any similarities at all as to what Aquaman already did, that leaves them open to legal action.
Totally. Legal action or at worst, and at best, criticism from the fans saying, oh, they just copied Aquaman, right? So what do? Where else can you tap into to get a rich cultural history and then, elevate it and really use the platform? I mean, to use the platform of the already established Wakandan culture to help kind of surface this new, fictional culture, but based in a it's a way to celebrate the culture, right? Through this fictionalized depiction, similar to how Wakanda celebrates the kind of the Afrofuturistic culture that was tapped into for that.
And that's another thing. I mean, as a fan of Afrofuturism, I love the depiction of Wakanda.
Totally.
I thought that was very cool. I mean, one of the great disappointments in my life is that my company did one of the last interviews with celebrated Black science fiction writer Octavia Butler. And she passed away. I was working on Chronicles of Narnia, and we were doing this disc that they canceled, and we had interviewed all these great science fiction and fantasy authors that had been influenced by C.S. Lewis, and she was one of them. And that interview has never seen the light of day.
Wow.
And one day,
I mean, she's the grandmother of Afrofuturistic literature.
Yeah.
I mean,
incredible.
Yeah.
And to me, the Mesoamerican cultures are so interesting and so rich. I mean, again, talk about colonialism. I mean, they were destroyed by the Spanish, and what's really interesting is Wakanda. I mean, look, I don't have a problem with people talking about colonialism. That's part of history. I mean, unfortunately, these civilizations did not develop technology, and they didn't have resistance to certain diseases. And, everybody bitches and moans. It's so funny to me when people bitch and moan and complain about colonization now. That happened like 400 years ago or 5. Like, it's never affected you. You can study it, but when you start talking about how, whoever's to blame for all this, I'm like, look, man, that's the history of humanity. Humanity is all about stronger civilizations conquering less strong civilizations from the dawn of time. And all of that, by the way, began in Africa, because all of humanity began in Africa.
Right.
And Mesoamerican culture, what I think is very cool, is that Wakanda was able to avoid colonialism by hiding. And the Mesoamerican culture was destroyed by colonization,
right.
And that's why the Talakan civilization went literally underwater. I would assume so. I mean, I don't know how they're going to depict it.
I mean, this gives us an opportunity to revisit and look critically at the long-term harm of colonialism, right? There's still very much. Puerto Rico is a classic example of an island nation with very little autonomy, because it still continues to operate as a colonial territory of the United States, which is a terrible.
That is a terrible. By the way, if I can get a little political, the fact that we haven't made Puerto Rico a state is a crime.
Yeah, or give it. Or being able to give it truthful independence so that they can make their own autonomous decisions. The problem is we continue to be in a colonial state, right? So if a movie like this can elevate those types of discussions with how we're dealing with the effects of colonialism today, I think this is great. I think this is a great way for us to be able to look critically at the issues that continue to permeate in today's society because of having had colonial structures in the past.
Well, and the funny thing about it is like people associate colonialism with certain skin color. And the fact is colonialism has affected every culture throughout the world. And the fact that you just pointed out, Puerto Rico is something that's suffering from American colonialism right now. And if they were made a state, they would have much more access to facilities and FEMA and everything immediately. And we would be able to shore up your defenses. We could fix your power grid in times of when it isn't needed, so it could weather these storms. But and you would be able to vote, and have representation in Congress.
Yeah, actual representation that has an impact in Congress. We have non-voting representation.
That's what I should say. I should clarify that. And it's crazy that we don't. And when we talk about colonization, people they mean like, the colonizers in Africa. What about the fact that we have a protectorate? What do we call it? What is it? A protectorate?
Well, they call it a commonwealth.
The British had Commonwealth. They're Commonwealth countries.
And it's not just Puerto Rico. It's the Mariana Island. The Mariana Islands are another example. The U.S. Virgin Islands are another example. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which the land of the free to this day continues to sustain colonial territories, right? So,
right, and most Americans don't even know that.
I mean, most Americans. I've run into situations where people have asked me, how did I become a citizen of the United States, or what was it, or what,
You're a dirty immigrant, Roberto.
Right, exactly.
You're from beyond the southern border, man.
There's some very.
Because you come from Puerto Rico, you really are, after these storms, you really are a wetback, man. Come on. Come on.
Right, exactly.
Literally, you've been flooded. You've been flooded. But no, I mean, it's, and by the way, someone, before you get all angry with me, Roberto and I know one another. He understands I made a joke.
Yeah.
And it was about real water and, not the...
Right.
People, I just want to be clear before everybody gets angry. Because some people will. They'll be, oh my God, Rob, you're such a... Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
well, and I think also an opportunity, opportunities to enrich people's experience of what it's like to be from a different culture. I mean, one of the questions that I always get, or one of the comments that I always get is, you don't look Puerto Rican. Oh. And that to me is always a teachable opportunity, a teachable moment, because I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? Right? Because Hollywood has depicted, people think of Puerto Rican as what you saw in West Side Story in the 1960s, right?
Come on, man. Everyone knows that's exactly what Puerto Ricans look like. Exactly. I mean, don't tell me that I haven't been in love with Anita for 50 years and for the right reasons.
Yeah, well, Anita, Rita Moreno is actually probably one of the few Puerto Ricans in the movie that actually, hails from the island, right? But,
my God. Can I just tell you, when I first saw West Side Story, the original is one of my favorite movies.
Mm-hmm.
There are few women who are sexier on film than she was in that movie. She's built just the way I like. I mean, oh my God. and how cool was it that the Anita in Spielberg's West Side Story continues that trend?
Yeah, very much so. But coming back to my point,
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay, because here in the United States, there's always been kind of a tendency, and again, a lot of this, I think this does come from a kind of colonial perspective of trying to categorize everything by race. And being Hispanic or Latino is not a racial category.
Right.
It's really...
What do you mean it's not?
It's a territorial category, right? If you come from, and within those territories, you're going to find a wide spectrum of races. Oh. And so when somebody tells me, oh, you don't look Puerto Rican, my response is, well, what do you think a Puerto Rican looks like? Because maybe the fact is that you don't have a broad understanding of what a Puerto Rican would look like. And you go to Puerto Rico, you're going to see every version of from race. I mean, Puerto Rican culture was comprised of native tribes, not as advanced as the Mesoamerican tribes, with the Taino tribes and the Caribe tribes. You have the Spanish colonials, and eventually followed by the U.S. colonials, and then you have the slave trade. So all of that mixed to create a very complex culture of multiple races and multiple religious traditions and cultural traditions. I mean, our food, our music draws from all of those different cultural histories and backgrounds.
Well, it's the same is true of like Afro-Cuban.
Exactly.
You look at that and people don't understand.
Totally. I mean, Cuba and Puerto Rico are, if you look at the flags of Puerto Rico and Cuba, they are considered sister islands. The flags are the opposite colors of one another. I mean, we share some similarities, especially when it comes to kind of the colonial development of those nations. So any opportunity in which we can elevate and educate, what has been kind of illuminate the traditional historical perspective in order to broaden it, I think is a great opportunity, and to be able to do that through our, I mean, it's not unlike using science fiction to deal with real world current day issues, right?
Absolutely. That's why I love
using the MCU to help elevate some of these questions and help us wrestle with those things within the context of a fictional story.
I feel the same way. I mean, and I think that as the MCU is leaning more heavily into other parts of the world, I've found it to be interesting. I just don't like when it doesn't, like, I think Phase 4 has been all over the place in terms of quality. And also there is no, I feel that, look, I floated a theory on the John Campea show that I think that all the movies that we've seen on Phase 4 are taking place on different Earths. Because, and we just don't know it yet. We're watching.
There's no common thread. Yeah, that would be an interesting.
And the first time we saw it is because J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson in Spider-Man at the end of Far From Home, which was, he shows up. That's the first time we realized that there was some kind of a multiverse incursion happening.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand why Arishem the Judge visits Earth we meet the Eternals, and there's a Celestial coming out of the Indian Ocean, and no one seems too concerned about it.
They did a throwaway reference to it in She-Hulk.
Yeah,
in
a
news
newspaper
article, right? But it's almost like
you'd think like aren't the peoples of the world concerned that there's a thing in space that's 2 or 3 times the size of the planet, especially after Thanos unsnapped everybody, the unsnapping happens, and I feel like I feel like we're and that, by the way, if they did that, it would blow my mind. And I'd be like, oh, you've been planning this the whole time. But I feel it's completely disconnected because you've got Egyptian gods fighting each other, eating the souls of people on the streets of Cairo, and no one seems concerned. That was a mass casualty event if you saw how many souls are being devoured by
those monsters. Yeah.
It's like, how many people died on the streets of Cairo? Like, nobody seemed to care.
Yeah, the one that gets me is how I was so convinced that the breakup of the timelines in Loki was going to tie in to the multiverse of madness and to the multiverse in Spider-Man. And none of that stuff has been interconnected in any way.
No, and look, I felt at the end of Loki, it felt like the universe was unraveling.
Totally.
And it was funny because at the same time I read a lot of Star Trek novels my whole life. And there was a Star Trek litverse that had 20 years of continuity. And Star Trek Picard seasons 1 and 2 ruined all of that continuity. It contradicted everything. So they had to get rid of it because they had to add in from a business standpoint, they've had to incorporate all of this modern Star Trek, which is this is really what's maddening and galling to as a Star Trek fan, where there was a reasonable, even though it was kind of all over the place, there was a pretty good continuity between all the Star Trek shows until Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. All the bad robot stuff and the secret hideout stuff just threw all of that out because they didn't give a fuck. And so my literary Star Trek verse that I've been reading for 20 years, they had to get rid of it. So rather than just get rid of it, these 3 authors, James Swallow, David Mack, and I'm forgetting the first person. Why am I? If he watches this, he's going to kill me. But they wrote a 3-novel series called Coda, Star Trek Coda. Yeah. Dayton Ward, and it was really, really good. But it was about the universe unraveling and timelines ending. I mean, many universes dying, and it was great. I loved it. It was epic.
It was Star Trek's version of like a Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And it was really well done. And if you read it was so epic. It was so huge. It was so gigantic, and everybody died. It was great. And I'm like, I thought that Marvel, the multiverse saga, was leading up to this. Maybe it still is, but there's no continuity. Even if you watch, I was talking about a YouTube show earlier on the show, and the MCU from the very beginning, even at the end of Iron Man 1, you hear about the Avengers Initiative, and they were constantly building on all of that, and you knew it was all, you felt it in all the films. They did a very good job, and all of that is out the window with Phase 4, and it's been really maddening to listen to.
Yeah, and I think there have been opportunities to kind of tie some of that together, but I just feel like they just wasted them. One of the, I go in my own what if scenarios for movies like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And first of all, I had a huge problem with that movie because I felt the character of Wanda had achieved a certain level of peace at the end of WandaVision that kind of got forgotten by the time the movie started, where they could have set up the precedent that what Wanda was experiencing under the Darkhold was what I thought they were doing, which at the end of WandaVision, we see her hearing the voices of these children, right?
Yeah.
And so her motivation in Doctor Strange could have been slightly tweaked to be something like, listen, I know my children weren't real, but there's a multiverse out there where there's these children that I can hear and I need to go save them. And so it becomes kind of this obsession to find this. And eventually, maybe what we find is that that's been somebody manipulating her. And maybe it has been all along what's his name, the big baddie that we're setting up for Kang, and to trap her in order for him to be able to do his incursion into the timeline.
Well,
that's
like, I agree.
Just some little nuggets like that could have started to weave these stories so much better than what they've given us so far.
Well, and the thing is, I'm an unabashed lover of the first 23. I thought the Infinity Saga, like,
yeah,
I can watch Infinity War and Endgame on an endless loop. I find them wildly entertaining. Like, I have to tell you, when I first saw Endgame, it opens with Hawkeye and his family, and they get snapped, and then Mr. Fantasy starts playing over the Marvel logo. I'm like, okay, this is so accomplished. This is so well thought out, even to the depiction of that song playing, and then the opening that movie showing Hawkeye's family disappearing. Brilliant. Just a brilliant way to do these movies. Just like Infinity War opening with Thanos killing Loki and all that.
Yeah,
and
it had a similar feel to The Leftovers. It didn't feel like an MCU, a superhero movie. It had that weight of like The Leftovers when Carrie Coon's character loses her whole family all at once.
It's funny you say that, because I had a hard time. I love the concept of The Leftovers, but the last episode, talk about a series that stuck the effing landing.
Yeah,
that Nora, the book of Nora, I think, is that last episode, and I was like, that was a show that I hate watched. I'd read Tom Peralta's book, and when that show drove me crazy because I'm like, listen, if Scott Glenn, if Homeboy's father is hearing voices and you can actually talk to those voices, why don't you sit him down and ask these voices questions, even though they never addressed what that was, but it stuck the landing, and I just feel that right now with the MCU, the reason that I'm disappointed in it is I don't feel the thought has been. I don't see the thought process, the thinking that went into the original MCU phase 1, 2, and 3. I don't see it in this phase. It's all over the place. Like, I look at She-Hulk, that should have been a no-brainer. That show is all over the place.
Yep.
I love the first episode with Hulk, and then every episode has been, it seems like it's reinventing its premise every show. And I'm like, I hate this. And it should be funnier than it is. And all of the...
Yeah, it's kind of lost because it's not as funny as it should be, but then it's not as grounded in the MCU as it should be either. It's like it's made some very bizarre choices outside of like the first couple of episodes, which were interestingly the ones that probably tied the most to the MCU, with Hulk being a part of her mentoring and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. But I think
the last one was interesting. Kind of the reintroduction of Daredevil. We can kind of see kind of the direction they're going to go with Daredevil.
I mean,
kind of lightening him a little bit. But
I thought the lawyer stuff with him was really good. The stuff where he was talking to her in the bar, I really liked all that stuff. And the Walk of Shame was hilarious. They should have ended
the Walk of Shame.
How do you not end an episode on that beat? How do you not go out on that beat? Because that faux the thing at the end when she wrecks everything, I'm like, what? Who cares?
Yeah,
it's like this whole thing that where they're trying to discredit her. Now it's amazing to me that everyone's saying, oh, it's Doomcock. That's funny. I mean, it's
associating it with that.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm sure there's a little bit of truth to that. But it's like, really, I mean, it's so funny because the creators can't get all of these YouTube channels, all of us pundits, we're all in their heads.
Yeah.
And I understand how frustrating it must be. I mean, look, even I have gone so hard on Star Trek Discovery for a long period of time.
Yeah.
And but I think it's a demonstrably terrible show. And I think that and if people like it, that's great, and because there's people that come to Star Trek, and I understand even my beloved original series, people can't go back, and if you're 20 years old right now, what I found interesting is a lot of people have asked me which Star Trek episodes to watch. Like they're like, Rob, I've never watched the original series, so I'm able to curate their journey through Star Trek, so I can sort of control, watch this, and you'll get it, you'll understand. but it's really hard, and I get it. It's really hard for people today, especially younger people, to go back and watch something that's almost 60 years old.
Yeah.
Just like if you're a James Bond fan, people are like, I've never watched James Bond. I never tell people to watch Dr. No. Dr. No is too dated.
Yeah.
We celebrated its 60th birthday just the other day, but I can't recommend anybody of today. If you're 35 years and younger, I would never tell you to go back and watch Dr. No. After you like James Bond, I would tell you to go back and watch Dr. No. That might be sacrilege, but I would at least tell you to watch From Russia with Love and understand it's a spy caper from the early 60s or Goldfinger or something. Dr. No is glacially paced. It doesn't have the action beats.
Right.
But I mean, back to, so like, knowing your audience, Wakanda Forever, to me, in my mind, has a lot of heavy lifting to do as far as the MCU is concerned with me. I mean, the MCU is on the verge of, I'll watch the movies. I hated Thor: Love and Thunder.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at the point now where just because of seeing what Love and Thunder reviews we're getting and listening to you and I have very similar tastes when it comes to our kind of genre fiction stuff. So I actually, waited till it came out on Disney Plus. I wasn't even that invested enough to go and the first MCU movie that I did not go see in the theater.
Yeah, and what did you think of it?
It was a disappointment. I mean, I just, again, the humor and all of the goofiness aside, my biggest piece is, how does this connect to everything else? I don't see any connection in any way, shape, or form in the way that had been delivered prior to Phase 4 in any of this. It just felt like an exercise in it felt like the Superman 3 of the 4 movies. It was like the parody of this superhero.
I totally agree, and the frustrating part was the story could have been great.
It could have been great.
It could have been a fucking movie for the ages.
And the elements of Mighty Thor and her dealing with cancer and all that stuff, there's some rich stuff to mine there, but it was glanced over for the sake of just very goofy, trite, overused laughs. I mean, that goat joke was funny the first time, and then it just kept going and going and going. Yeah, I just
it's also a movie that made Thor. It made fun of Thor. And when you're making, to me, humor is great situational humor does not denigrate your main characters. And that movie, and what was so frustrating is that like the What We Do in the Shadows series and the movie, especially the Taika Waititi's film, I love that movie, and it's all situational. The vampires are funny, but it never is. The humor is not at the expense of the characters.
Yep.
It's all situational. By the way, we've got Brundlefly. Nice reference to Cronenberg's The Fly. Says, Rob, you're the man. Thumbs up. Well, thank you, Brundlefly. Our friend Darth Plato says, you mentioned She-Hulk. Lots of complaints, but seriously, I hate how the show depicted the Wrecking Crew from Thor's Rogues Gallery. Did you get a load of those guys? Yeah. They look like the frickin' Biff Tannen gang from Back to the Future, the 2015 version. I completely agree. They were. It was all a goof.
It was a throwaway. Yeah.
And they've got the Asgardian tech. And it's that's another thing. That show with look, I expected the way James Spader was written in The Practice and in Boston Legal, the way that Ally McBeal was written. I wanted a sharp, very funny show, and I feel like this is one of the problems I feel with the way they want to the hiring practices in Hollywood now. Everyone, they want to give all these people that don't traditionally get a shot, which I understand. But a lot of the time we're not. It's sacrificing quality, the quality of writing, the quality of you need veteran writers. You need people that have experience to write this stuff. I mean, I think we see it. We know. I mean, Vince Gilligan worked on X-Files. Then he created Breaking Bad, and the guy worked in TV for almost 30 years.
Look at the difference between what we've gotten from Star Wars and Andor now. I mean, you can just see it right then and
Tony
there.
Gilroy's an Academy Award-winning
you
screenwriter.
Get on a tour like Tony Gilroy, and then this is what you get out of Star Wars, right?
I mean, what's funny is I love his movie Michael Clayton, and Andor is very similar to Michael Clayton in terms of its. I mean, who would have thought a Star Wars series could open with with a cereal and having breakfast cereal with his Jewish mom.
I know.
Elizabeth was just watching that tonight. I go, you got to watch the 5th episode of Andor. She was watching it before I did the show, and she's like, since when do they have Jewish mothers in the Star Wars universe? I'm like, they've always had them. We just haven't seen them.
We've just never seen them.
Because Jewish mothers are everyone's mothers.
It takes a Tony Gilroy to show us that that they're there, and to sell it to us, not just that they're there, but to really sell it to us.
And the writing and the acting. By the way, Jared Snyder says, Rob and Roberto, do you think Ryan Coogler was influenced by the Olmec stone heads that depict African faces in Mesoamerican headgear? Great topic.
Gosh, I mean, that's something that is beyond my sphere of knowledge. But if it's, I wouldn't put it past Coogler to do his research and to find all sorts of influences, because I mean that's an interesting thing. I'm not aware of what he was referring to, but if we're talking about potential crossovers between Mesoamerican culture and African culture, I mean, who knows what kind of interesting stuff you could mine from that, right? I mean.
Oh yeah, and the idea that I love the idea that maybe the Talocan, whatever it is, empire, whatever, and Wakanda have a long history.
A long history. Who knows what the pre-colonial trade existed, before Europeans reached any of these nations. What happened back then? When you think about the Polynesians who traveled in the Kon-Tiki and were able to make it, halfway across the world. There was all this stuff happening that a lot of that history is lost to time.
Completely lost because they didn't have ways to record it.
Because it wasn't recorded, right? So who knows?
I mean, it's so interesting to me that when we talk about things like colonialism or like the slave trade, people act like America was the only country that enslaved people.
No.
When the African slave trade sold far more slaves to the Middle East and up in that region than the transatlantic slave trade, and they were more brutal. They castrated their slaves, so they couldn't procreate, and that's why when you look into that, and people, I wish people would go back not just to the 1600s, but go back even further. Slavery was one of the oldest things that humanity did to each other.
Totally.
And slavery is a terrible thing, but it's been a constant in human civilization. And I think that, and a lot of that was lost to time. And it wouldn't surprise me if, to go back and to find out that I'm sure the Talocan Empire, I mean, they had slaves, the Mayans and the Aztecs and African nations enslaved other Africans. I mean, this is something that this is all part of history.
Yeah.
And how interesting would it be that not only were they called, it's like we just saw the Woman King, where that country was a big, they were big slavers. And it's all historical. No one is innocent in history. And there's no reason to fear that.
Right. I mean, what we have to fear is the finding ourselves in a situation where we end up repeating history because we have not been learning the lessons from the past.
Yes, and they're all there for us.
They're all there for us.
And I'll tell you, like you pointed out, I mean, I think when we have great science fiction and fantasy and they touch on these things, you have a bit of reality. It really makes people think. And look, Rod Serling certainly knew this when he was writing The Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Network standards and practices gave him a list of things he could not touch on. But because it was in the context of the Twilight Zone,
he touched upon them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And he could say, "Oh no, this is the Twilight Zone. I'm not really talking about race relations. Right. I'm not really making an anti-wars or anti-Vietnam statement or something. Or actually, it wasn't Vietnam really yet. But and same with Star Trek. They got away with these things. Star Trek actually did comment on Vietnam, but in the context of, hey, it's an alien planet. It's not Indochina. What are you talking about? We're not talking about Vietnam, And so why shouldn't the MCU take on the great tradition of fantasy literature and science fiction by bringing something up? I mean, that's what I'm really looking forward to, is the comparing and contrasting of Wakanda and Talocan.
Yeah. Well, and they've already been doing this. I mean, I thought that one of the best things about a recent MCU kind of addressing these issues in a contemporary way was kind of how they handled their approach in Falcon and Winter Soldier
Oh,
to
yeah.
was kind of like the Tuskegee Airmen kind of approach to the Super Soldier
That was so good. And again,
so well done.
they were going out and looking at the comic series The Truth, and the whole idea of Sam Wilson, is he worthy of taking up the mantle of Captain America, and being told by someone else, another black man, they will never accept you as Captain America, and there's no reason you should do this. They're all shitty. They'll experiment on you. Fuck them. And Sam Wilson said, I know, but I still believe that I should take up the mantle of Captain America. I still believe in what Steve Rogers represented. He represented hope. I agree with you. I loved that about. I mean, it's funny to me. The more I think about it, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was the most MCU of the MCU stuff, because it was dealing directly with Steve Rogers' legacy with Sam Wilson. And I love the relationship that they had from the time they first met in Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I love that when they were jogging, the whole on your left. I loved all that. It was so well done. Tom Jr. Jackson says, Rob, do you think now that Man-Thing is in the MCU, we could get a solo film or TV project? Well, people forget Kevin Feige did produce a Man-Thing movie. It's not very good, but the one thing
was that ever actually released?
I think it was, but not here. I don't know.
Okay.
What's interesting about Man-Thing is quote unquote the nexus of all realities. He's like, and they didn't get into that. I was waiting for them to do it, but I loved Ted.
This goes back to what you were saying earlier. I bet you all of Phase 4 is taking place inside of Man-Thing.
I mean, or
all of these reality,
or something
all of
like
these
that.
Realities are swirling in there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I loved it. I thought it was so good. I loved Werewolf by Night.
I haven't watched it yet. I have to check it out.
Our friend Sonny Dominguez, Sonny, who made a show a couple weeks back, very memorable. Sonny says, it's not only the edibles talking, but I was highly impressed by Werewolf by Night. That style of filmmaking, do you think could make any type of comeback? More practical effects, less is more storytelling. Technology makes it easier for filmmakers. Look, you can do anything. I mean, what I find interesting now is if something is well done, audiences are more open to watching all different kinds of things now, especially younger people. I mean, kids today are, especially Gen Z, they've got so much to draw from, and there's not a lot of, especially modern music. You look at all these reaction channels when younger people are going back and listening to records from the 60s, even the 50s and 70s and 80s, and they're finding all this interesting stuff. We now live in a culture where I think there's pushback to movies still. Well, I'm not going to go back and watch because the style of film, the actual film stocks are different. And I know that Sophie, Elizabeth's daughter, she's 19. She's like, oh, I don't want to watch that movie based on the film color.
Or black and white. I get people who tell me I don't watch black and white movies, which to me is sacrilege, right? I mean, how could you miss out on such just a legacy of filmmaking that comes from the 40s and 50s? But
we grew up in an era where we would watch everything.
We would watch everything.
There was,
and we researched stuff, I remember actually, learning from my neighbor, hey, have you ever heard of James Cagney's White Heat? And I was like, no, I haven't. And then I would go down a James Cagney rabbit hole, and
top of the world,
all of a sudden we're getting Angels with Dirty Faces and all of these other kind of film noirs and stuff. So I would just go down those deep rich holes and just totally get sucked in. Exploring those areas,
Well, what's funny,
genres.
I mean, to me, I wanted to see when I was a kid. I'm like, I want to see every. I love kaiju movies. The first Godzilla was black and white, and then Rodan was in color. So it was like, okay, one movie's in black and white. It never occurred to me not to watch something that was in black and white. I just understood, okay, Universal monster movies were made in the 30s. They didn't have color film then.
It's part of the history.
And I wasn't going to not go back and watch Frankenstein and Dracula and Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolf Man and The Invisible Man and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm not going to not watch them because they're black and white. They were fucking great.
And I grew up with a black and white TV, so there were programs in color and movies in color that I didn't know were not in black and white. So we were actually watching some things in black and white, even when we didn't even realize that color was a thing. So,
yeah, I mean, and it's weird to me because when I was a kid, like I understood there were things that were made before I was born.
Yeah.
And I would go back, like I've said on this show many, many times, that pop culture has a half-life of 20 years. Like most people are interested in the pop culture of their day. Yeah. But it has shifted. When we were kids, like especially with music, like I was going back and I became a big fan of Pink Floyd, and when I got The Wall for when I turned 13, somebody gave me the album The Wall. I didn't know Pink Floyd had this I didn't know they had recorded Uma Guma and, Animals, and I had heard Dark Side of the Moon. I knew the song Money, and Time or whatever. But you go back and then you discover all these bands. And I became a huge fan of The Doors when I was in junior high school. And people thought that was funny. Like my older cousins were like, "You love The Doors?" I go, "Yeah, man," as if I just discovered it. And they were all like aging hippies. They're 20 years older than me. And I'm like, okay. But so are you optimistic about the future of the MCU? I mean, obviously we're going to get Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. And I mean, for me right now, I'm not as interested as I thought I would be because the movies and where the MCU is now has not made me as interested in all of this as I want. I want to be more interested because I loved the first 23 movies. 3. Yeah. Loved it.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if, I had heard somebody recently say, is Kevin Feige stretched too thin at this point that he's not able to kind of, keep that really cohesive view over it? Or maybe there's some purpose behind this to be like, hey, we're going to take a step back and just give these characters a little bit of breathing room to just kind of do their standalone thing and whatnot, and then refocus for the next phase. Which, on the one hand, I can understand, but I think that can be done, and at the same time keep people engaged. I think the best example of that is what was done with No Way Home, right? I think No Way Home, in a way, I thought it was going to tie more into this multiverse stuff.
Me too.
It seems like it didn't quite, but it still managed to be engaging and very entertaining, standalone film kind of on its own. But I since then, I just kind of felt like everything we've gotten has been, just kind of disparate. It just has not had that cohesiveness that we saw through the first three phases.
And also, I think another thing about, even though we've got Guardians of the Galaxy and Skrulls and Captain Marvel and Ego the Living Planet, in phase 1, 2, and 3, I still felt it was all very believable. Like I believed it all, the science fiction elements, the fantasy elements, the superheroic elements, they all work together. I first felt this during Loki. When you're meeting the Time Variance Authority, I'm like, this is in Brazil territory. This didn't feel
totally
like it was part of the same thing. It strained credulity and pushed the boundaries of the MCU way too far for me. I'm like, you've made me believe in Thanos. You made me believe in the Guardians and all the things that the Kree and the Skrull and all that. I believe all that. I did not believe the Time Variance Authority. They did a good job with it, and I know it's from the comics, but the way it was portrayed was Terry Gilliam. It was goofy. And it suddenly, and by the time you get to wherever they were, the end of time and the alligator Loki and the frog Loki, I'm like, I do not. You have gone. This has jumped the shark for me. Even though I did like the show, the whole thing. But what happened? I'm like, I don't believe that we're in the same universe anymore.
I think I was in a similar place to you, but when they introduced a version of Kang at the end, and they started to kind of break off the idea of the timeline separating, I thought at that point, okay, they're finally coming around to giving me something for this phase that's gonna be the thread. And so my disappointment was not seeing that. I wanted to see the connection to Spider-Man No Way Home, the connection to the Multiverse of Madness. And all I kept seeing was all of these things are being treated like unrelated events. And so that's the part that frustrated me.
Yeah, and it was I felt Loki was just a goof.
Yeah.
There was a lot of cool stuff in it, but I'm like, this is goofy. The tone of it was wrong. And like the TVA with Miss Man or Miss whatever that clock was and all
the clock, yeah.
And I'm just like, what is this? This seems like a Neil Gaiman story. Like if Neil Gaiman came in and wrote for the MCU, it was a Sandman-esque type of thing. It didn't feel part of the rest of it at all. And even having the TVA, the time with the thing about the MCU that worked so well is when we first saw Iron Man was taking place in our world, if that makes any sense. Very much
so. It was grounded,
and it was grounded, and you met soldiers, and he was just trying to keep once he had a change of heart, it's like, my company manufactures arms, and Obadiah Stane wanted to get rich, right. That was it. I got it. It was very personal. And then if you go to Loki, you're like, what the fuck? If you look at those, try as an exercise, everyone out there, watch Iron Man 1. If you haven't watched it in a while, you'll be surprised at how grounded and realistic it is. Yeah. And then if you go and watch Loki, you'll be like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I
even remember interviews with Favreau about him talking about, we want to make this very much grounded in reality, right? And it's not unlike what happened with the CW's DC shows that started very grounded with Arrow, and then it just kind of got to the point where it was completely all over the place, right? And so I kind of feel like that's kind of maybe it's part of the growing pains of the MCU to kind of be in this stage now, and maybe like I said, this is kind of a reset phase to just kind of breathe a little bit. Sadly, I think it's at the expense of many of us fans feeling like this is not going anywhere. But maybe there'll be some refocusing as we finish phase 4 and we move into all these projects that they've announced.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. I read the scripts for Secret Invasion and really liked it. Really liked it a lot. And to me, it was much more along the lines of what I was interested in. It was geopolitics and dealing with the fact that, we've been invaded by...
It feels a lot like Winter Soldier in a sense.
It is.
Yeah, the trailers, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I even put it on. I cheekily put a line of dialogue on Twitter.
I saw that.
And it's. I'll read it now. I hope I'll get demonetized. But this is actually a. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. This is a line of dialogue. I'm going to read this out of context, but this is from page 4 of the first script for Winter Soldier.
You're going to get in trouble here, Rob. You're going to get in trouble. You're giving away way too much already.
You're right. Maybe I shouldn't say it. Anyway, well, if you go down my Twitter feed, because they can demonetize you because it's breaking copyright. I probably shouldn't. You're right, because they did that to me when I was reading like the Dune script, and I'm like, come on, man.
I remember when you did the Dune script. Yep. And they took it.
But you know what? Funny enough, nobody went after me when I read the Duel of the Fates script.
Right.
I was the first person to break that story.
You were the one who broke that. Yeah. And and it's been made into an online web comic book now, which is great.
I know. And what's funny, because that script went out, everybody was able to get it, but I was the first.
And interestingly enough, the Dune script that you discussed ended up not even being the Dune script that actually made it to the movie. I would say it was a better Dune script.
Well, yeah, it was the same script, but they'd cut a bunch of stuff out.
They did, yeah.
And here's the thing: I think Dune is a great example of peak verisimilitude, but I think that movie, like all the scenes in the movie, are cut to. They're all bare bones. They are cut to the very bare bone, the least that some of those scenes could have been allowed to live and breathe, and they could have added, because all those scenes were twice as long as they were in the script. I mean, totally. they're half as long as they were in the script. And I feel like as long as Dune is, they went for the atmospherics and the whole letting the world wash over you, and we really missed a lot of the scenes
Yeah.
that I liked in the script. But yeah, it's funny because, I mean, Dune's a book. Pasty Coppertop sends in a super chat and asks, why is diversity only color, gender, or sexuality? Well, I think it's not, but we human beings are lazy and we categorize ourselves in easy ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that diversity, color, gender, and sexuality are easy, but there's also nationality. There's many ways.
Socioeconomic diversity. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in which you can kind of
educational diversity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think look, we're in a very weird time. We were on a good path where social evolution was happening, acceptance was happening, people were being recognized, but it wasn't happening fast enough. So now, especially in the hallowed halls of academia, we've gone completely off the rails, and what's happening is the oppressed have become the oppressors, and it's interesting to see. It's interesting to watch, and I look, the fact that I get a lot of, even amongst the fan community, ageist shit thrown at me. Get out, go away, Grandpa, and I don't give a fuck. But it's really interesting to see that, to see how quickly. My greatest fear is the loss of civility, and we saw Russia invading Ukraine, and now as we see the Russians going back into these cities where we're under Russian control for 4 months, the horrible atrocities the Russian soldiers and the people, that's what happens in war when you have those kinds of things. I mean, finding like whole big Tupperware tins of gold teeth that were pulled out of people. It's like, this is exactly what the Nazis were doing in World War II. And it's happening right now because you have a group of people that didn't want to go to war, that were thrown in horrible situations that dehumanizes everybody. I mean, and now it's no wonder that Russia's falling apart, and there's talk of using their nuclear weapons. It's like, my God, really?
Gosh. Yeah, I know.
Can you imagine if they use a suitcase nuke or a tactical?
I can't. I mean, it's
I can't imagine what that, and even Putin saying, well, America used a nuclear weapon. Yeah, at the end of World War II.
Right.
How many? 20 million Russians died under the Nazi onslaught.
Yeah, and we've learned since then, right? The whole point is to learn from that and be like, okay, even the creators of the bomb realized the evil they had unleashed, and we've learned from that, and we've talked about disarmament treaties and all of these things through the years. Like you said, we were evolving, and this has been just a couple of years of regression.
Yeah, I mean, we've been completely, and again, I think a lot of it is performance activism. There's a lot, people don't have as much in their lives anymore as they used to. We're everyone's looking inward, and they feel better about themselves when they can go talk on TikTok or social media and get feedback, positive feedback when they say, I believe in this. Oh, good. Oh, you're absolutely right. I'm an ally. And I feel you're great. Awesome. Good for you. Like, why don't you get the fuck out of your house, stop making videos, and go do something for yourself? Make something. Make something. Go try and work with 10 different people to create something that didn't exist, and see how your thoughts work out when you have to work with 10 different kinds of people you've never worked with before on a project.
Yeah.
I think we need a lot more of that. Magic K says, Werewolf by Night gives me very strong Universal Monsters vibes. I hope Michael Giacchino can direct Tomb of Dracula for next Halloween. Man, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. I would love to see that.
But again, I did want to see more of how did this whole milieu, the whole Bloodstone and how did that fit into the larger MCU?
They said it's kind of in a very remote corner of the MCU. This is all happening within the same universe, but not, at least the connections are not being drawn just yet.
I mean, the X-Men did meet Dracula in the pages of an X-Men annual. And Moon Knight did start in Werewolf by Night, and
started in Werewolf by Night, yeah.
So all this stuff exists. I'm just, where my question is, like, I look at something like Werewolf by Night. If you're a vampire or you're a daywalker, when Thanos snapped his fingers, was there part of the supernatural community that got blipped?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I don't mean that to be facetious. I want to know.
Well, or because you're undead. or you're dead already. Maybe you didn't register in the snap.
Right. And but I think they need, I mean, seems silly, but they do need to define this.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't ask them to do it this way, but if half the universe is because it's half of life or whatever animal.
Yeah.
So anything that could consume something, and I would assume that vampires, use up a resource, which is blood, human blood.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I don't mean to be flippant, but it could happen. Alex Detman sent in a $20 super chat. Thank you very much for that, Alex. Rob, if given the chance to direct an MCU film with full creative power, what would you want to direct, and who would you like in it, and where would you like the narrative to be?
Wow.
That's a tough, I would love to go back and do a World War II story, like the Defenders or the Invaders. I would love to do the Invaders, a team film. I really thought, as much as I like Captain America, the First Avenger, it never reached the heights that I wanted it to in terms of its World War II. Like, I would love to do Where Eagles Dare. If you haven't seen the World War II movie Where Eagles Dare with Richard Burton or Clint Eastwood, or The Guns of Navarone, or a movie like Ice Station Zebra, which is a spy thriller from the early 60s. I would love to make a Where Eagles Dare, but with superheroes attacking, the Wolf's Den or whatever. Like a World War II Men on a Mission movie, but with superheroes. Yeah. I would love to do something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of great escape type of
The Great
approach.
Escape would be, that would be amazing. And what would really be interesting is, like, you could do a Great Escape movie and introduce mutants in World War II, like in the European theater, where these crazy, because look,
they're
if
being experimented on, or there's some kind of a mutant concentration camp, and then
a mutant concentration camp, and how do you? So Magneto wasn't there. Maybe his father was there, or his grandfather was in this mutant concentration camp, or something. Or. I mean, it would be but I'd love to do more of a Men on a Mission movie, like a group of disparate guys. Like, when I was growing up, I loved the Dirty Dozen. I loved Patton. Yeah. So it'd be great to go back and do, and they did. I mean, First Avenger did a great job but it wasn't, the World War II stuff was good, but it didn't reach the heights that I wanted it to. It didn't get into total kick-ass territory. It needed more Quentin Tarantino. It needed more Inglourious Bastards.
More Inglourious Bastards. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that would have been, man, I would have loved that. Sonny Dominguez says, I saw Triangle of Sadness last night. I can't wait to see this movie. It's supposed to be great. Wow. Biting social commentary with dark satirical humor. A+. Anyone notice the stars of Y Tu Mamá También both have hit projects on Disney? Yes, on Hispanic Heritage Month, of course, the star.
Gael Garcia Bernal and Diego Luna.
Both the two boys, and by the way, Y Tu Mamá También is such a great film, and now you see them, 30 years later or something, and they both are on Disney Plus shows and rival. I mean, how cool is that?
And the woman is going to be in the new movie by Iñárritu, the one that's coming out on Netflix. What's that?
Not Bruno, but
something. Yeah.
Is it Bruno?
Whatever that is, with something about
Bruiser,
hidden truths or something, or fake truths or something like that. It's got a long title, but I believe she's in it. The woman from Y Tu Mamá También. So all three of them are going to be showcased, within a couple of months of each other on productions.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Our friend RRTNZ, all the way in New Zealand, says, "Hail, Bob. Mate, with your current look, you could be James Gunn's stunt double." Has he booked you for Peacemaker Season 2? No, but I do know James. In all seriousness, even when I disagree, I still love your insights. Cheers. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Always love to hear from you. Speaking of hearing from people, Matt at the end has been a member for 7 months of the channel, and Ricky B, hello Ricky B, how are you? Has been a member for 22 months. Thank you for that. By the way, we were gonna have we can't do a member call next week because I'm gonna be in Vegas at an event with Justin from Justin's Collection on YouTube.
Nice.
So I'll be there. We're going to this Queen Studios event. He's flying in from Australia, but maybe on Sunday. I mean, did you say you were available on Sunday?
This Sunday I'm available.
Yeah, maybe we could
Maybe we could do something this coming Sunday.
Yeah, like after we do Let's Get Physical Media.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up to you, because I know you do Let's Get Physical, so it's whether or not you have the time and the energy.
Yeah,
to,
I mean, I would love to
the
do it. We should do a member call because they're fun.
Yeah,
So,
we can do that.
You know, like at 1:00, and we'll keep it. I mean, they always go for like 4 hours. We'll try and keep it 3. I always appreciate your time because they last a lot. But member calls are great, you know, and the more, because you know, I've sort of let the channel. We're gonna bring back, like, what's really funny is I have new microphones.
Ooh,
like, yeah,
nice.
and so I have 2 of these. And the reason I have 2 of these and a mixing board is because, by the way, I was looking for this. This goes to my Tutankhamun figure. I wonder where it went. And now I found it.
Oh, I thought it was the hook for the microphone.
No, I had this up here. I'm like, oh my God, now I found it. I did that because we're gonna bring back whining about movies. And we could never. Elizabeth didn't have her own mic, and so now I have 2 mics, and we're gonna bring back not Let's Get Physical Media, whining about movies, because everyone asks about it. And I want to bring the channel back. Since I've been with Campy, I've sort of let it go.
Well, speaking of content for the channel, Alex Montano and I met last weekend, and we have a trailer coming soon for you. So,
because I can't wait. So why don't you explain to people what this is going to be?
We're just hoping to put together a show for geeks.
No, you're not hoping to put together.
We are putting together. We are putting together a show for, by geeks for geeks in Spanish in the PGS channel. So hoping to open up the opportunity for the Spanish-speaking geek world, which there are a lot of Spanish-speaking geeks in the or geeks in the Spanish-speaking world. And just have an opportunity to bring him into the PGS community.
Oh, I think it's going to be great. You know, does her own show. I let her do her own show on the channel on Mondays, which is pretty good, and really been enjoying her doing that. So I want to do that more, you know, and people can, as I said, if you get your own Stream Elements link, I always encourage people to, because you can get tips because the channel's already monetized or whatever. So, and then I'll find out. I mean, it won't be for new shows. It's not a lot of ad revenue, but I'll still find out what it is and give you the money that the channel makes.
More than anything, I just think it would be a fun. We're talking about wanting to expand the audience and be more inclusive and more diverse. So they say when you to know another language is to have another soul. So let's bring more souls aboard.
I agree.
To be a part of the community, right?
I mean, I think that would be great. It wouldn't it be cool if we could have like shows in every language?
Oh man,
on the channel.
Yeah, I mean, we have with physical media, you've got German representation there with Dieter, and so then we could do something. Who knows? Also, all sorts of languages could be a part of the community.
Oh yeah, I think it'd be fun. Let's see. Ricky B sends in a super chat and says, I just got back from a week in Vegas, Robs. Well, congratulations.
Wow.
A week in Vegas, man. I 2 nights kill me. Because I never like to stop. Norwegian Kryptonian says, if I wanted to send you something, where do I send it? If you find me on Twitter or whatever, I can send you my actual address to send things to me directly. That's the best way. Elon Abadi sends in a tip and says, first time catching you live, Rob. Thanks for staying up this late. Talking about adapting Namor was fascinating. Love and thunder from Israel. Well, shalom. Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. Maybe next year in Jerusalem.
Nice.
It's funny. I was in Israel in 2005. I was the guest of honor in Tel Aviv at this Icon. It was a science fiction festival called Icon, and I was there with Roger Nygaard. I love Israel. Israel is the greatest. I had so much fun in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and I mean, I can't. If anybody wants to go to a great vacation spot, Tel Aviv is such a fun city to go to.
Oh wow!
Beautiful beaches. You take great day trips. The food is great. The women are great. Not that I would know. I mean, but it was at the time, it was great.
At the time, hey.
Yeah, it was great. So, Alon, big fan of your country. Israel is great. You know what was funny about Israel, too? Everybody was asking me, they're all worried that I'd get offended that they were pirating everything they were watching. Like
Oh,
they were
really?
downloading stuff, this was in 2005. And I'm like, look, man, if they're not going to release it legally, if you can't get it legally, I can't.
Right.
I'm like, if you want to watch something and no one, because they're all like, we would buy it, we just can't get it.
Right. You just can't get it. Sure.
And I remember one of the things I got when I was in Israel, they had just released Batman Begins, Nolan's Batman Begins on DVD. Okay. So I don't know where it is, but I bought the DVD of Batman because I wanted to get the cover. It says Batman Begins in Hebrew, which it's really cool. I had to.
Very cool. Yeah.
Being raised a Jew, my grandmother. This is pretty funny. So my grandmother went to Israel when I was like, I want to say I was probably, this is in 83 or 84. Mm-hmm. And she asked me if I wanted anything from Israel. I said, I want a Israeli movie poster. And like, if you can find me, if you can find me a movie poster, whatever it is, I'd love to get a movie poster in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother went to a movie theater in Tel Aviv and asked if she could get a poster for her grandson back in the United States. And then whoever she talked to, they had all the movie posters. And the way my grandmother told me is they had a huge stack of movie posters. And the woman said, well, just pick one out. And my grandmother picked one out. She didn't look at it until she came home. She didn't know what it was. And so, and then she finally, because she was going to give it to me, so she unfolded it to see what it was. And it was so funny, the look on her face. She explains this and she goes, and here is the poster that I got for you. And I open it up. It was Return of the Jedi.
Oh my goodness.
In Hebrew. And my grandmother was just sitting back. She's like, I could have spent $10,000 and bought you something in Israel, but it wouldn't have been better than this movie poster that I got for free.
Like, that is awesome. Yeah, I did something similar when I did a trip through Europe, between my junior and senior years in college. Did a backpacking trip, and we were in Belgium, and at a movie theater they were playing it was the summer when Hunt for Red October was playing, and they gave me a Hunt for Red October poster with Flemish on the text of the poster. Yeah, it was that one that's like, it's all red, and you kind of see the kind of high contrast image of Sean Connery in red and black.
Oh, that's the best.
But all of it with Flemish text. Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Oh, I love that. Yes, that's because I love foreign posters. Mm-hmm. I'm a big fan of that. So I'm looking for, I've got pictures of me in Israel, and I'm looking for them, but I can't. There's so much crap in Israel that I can't. I mean, on my computer, I can't find it. I don't know where. Yeah. I don't know where they are. But I have them somewhere. I'm just looking. But it was great. I mean, it was so much fun being in Tel Aviv. And let's see. Speaking of that, our friend just said. Elon says, I live in Tel Aviv, and I love your Israeli piracy story. No, it was very fun. And I'll tell you something. Okay, the event that I went to, the Icon Festival, was at the Tel Aviv Cinematheque. Okay. That's right next to the university. And I stayed at a hotel at the time. It was called like Hotel Cinema, and it was an old movie theater that had been turned into a hotel. It was right by the beach. And it was pretty funny because when I was there, like, I was a party animal, and everybody, it was a science fiction festival, and everybody, nerds are nerds around the world. By the way, Israel has amazing sci-fi nerds.
Oh yeah.
They cosplay. I mean, they're as into it as any nerds anywhere in the world, and they all speak English. So I was like, okay, we're all going out. And like, I was dancing on tables and buying everybody shots, and nerds are nerds. I've been to nerd. I went to the very first Star Trek convention in Paris. Nerds are nerds. Our people are the same around the world. Doesn't matter what country you're in. We're all the same. So you can go anywhere.
We speak that common language,
yes.
No matter what. Yeah.
Nerd. I spell nerd flesh. Glenn Mark says, late to the party tonight, a case of Monteith beer. Where can I go to grab an address for you? So first of all, Glenn Mark lives in New Zealand. Now, when I lived in New Zealand working on both Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I became addicted. There's a brewery in New Zealand called Monteith's they made. I loved Monteith's Black, which was a stout.
Oh,
and man, I sucked. I was like, I don't know why. I mean, I'm not necessarily a big stout beer drinker, but let's face it, I love any alcoholic beverage, but I love Monteith's Black, and you cannot get it in the United States. The last time I had it was in 2004 because we were in New Zealand for 14 months on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I was there on and off during Lord of the Rings, but for Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we were there the whole time, and it was amazing. So I will get you, Glenn Mark. You can find me on you can either, by the way, you can always send me a letter through the website at Post-Geek Singularity. Yep. There's a place to contact me and just say personal to Rob or something, and I'll get it, and I can send you back an address.
Yep. Yeah, address.
Yeah, because you can't. We can't in the United States. There's big tariffs put on New Zealand products because they do not allow. They're a nuclear-free, or they were 17 years ago. They're a nuclear-free country. They do not allow our nuclear naval vessels to dock at New Zealand ports.
Oh, wow.
So you couldn't. It was hard to get New Zealand beer. Like it's in the States. Like I was never able to find Monteith's Black in the States. People looked at me like, "What?"
Too cost prohibitive to bring it over here.
Yeah. It's too,
Wow.
and I'd be curious. I don't even know if you could send it to the United States if there's still that tariff or whatever.
I mean, you might get to send it clandestinely, right? Not report that you're sending.
Yeah, it's like
liquor,
Cuban
right?
cigars.
Exactly. Just hope that some police dog doesn't sniff it out or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, you've done it now. You've got New Zealand hooch coming into the country
illegally. You're avoiding taxes.
That's pretty
Speaking
funny.
of Lord of the Rings, Rob, I appreciated your discussion. Was it today on the Rings of Power?
On our after show.
Yeah. So I think I was very much in a. I know you were being diplomatic, but I could definitely tell I was feeling very much some of the same kind of frustrations that you were expressing.
Well, again, I just don't believe what I'm watching.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching Rings of Power, and they've got all the money in the world to make the movie, to make the series, but I don't believe, I just don't. It didn't become Mordor in an afternoon. And when you have Galadriel, you've got a volcanic explosion, and she's standing, all the people around her are dying, and she's just literally a cloud of volcanic ash.
Yeah, which is probably thousands of degrees that would have scorched your skin or something, and nothing happened.
I mean, it's just this idea that Mordor just exploded. I mean, Mordor, the Mount Doom was created during the First Age. I mean, I understand people like it and they want to defend it. I get it, man, but we've got Rings of Power, and then we're comparing and contrasting that to Andor and House of the Dragon. I mean, the thing about House of the Dragon is you can watch two people in a room talk for 10 minutes, and you understand that they have histories, and I just don't believe. Like I said it on the show, all the characters in Rings of Power are archetypes. Mm-hmm. And even Chris said to me, well, Tolkien was where all the fantasy archetypes came from, and I'm like, yeah, but the writing now is what I want to see from these archetypes is I want them to be living, breathing characters. And it's like everybody has these assigned ways of being. I just don't believe anything is real. I mean, I like the relationship that Elrond and Durin have. That seems reasonable. But the rest of it, I just don't buy it.
And I'm having trouble buying the whole thing about elves needing to be saved by Mithril and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. It just seems to me very artificial. Like they're trying to create some kind of.
Well, they are, and that's not from Tolkien.
Out of that, no, totally not. And I think now with the Harfoots getting their village, their caravans burnt, my guess is that they're going to decide to settle down, and this is the birth of Hobbiton, and that's where Gandalf, the weird wizard is going to end up being Gandalf, and this is going to be now they're going to give us the origin story of Hobbiton because they finally decide to settle down or something.
Well, yeah, and all that, it's so like they don't. Why do they have to do that? Like what's so weird is they want it. This is taking place thousands of years before the Third Age, and what like I don't. Why do they feel they have a need to tie everything together? I feel like that's a huge mistake on the part of the showrunners.
It's like we deliberately decide to do a show thousands of years in the past so that we don't have to get trapped by what you already know, and then everything is kind of leading up to. We're gonna show you how everything happened.
I mean, it took Mordor hundreds, if not thousands, of years to wind up being like. How long did it take to build Barad-dûr and all of that stuff, and the lands, and it didn't happen. Now in one day, it's like now we're at Mordor. In case you don't know, no, you're not. It hasn't been called Mordor yet.
Yeah,
they don't even have a character call it Mordor. What do we call it, boss?
Yeah, I know. And if anything. Rather than just having that weird, text and graphic come up, why not do it on the map? They've shown us that map from, if anything, that would have been the place to really show, just to have the map end and now it says Mordor instead of the South.
But what's funny is
like that,
it isn't Mordor yet.
It isn't.
I mean, and that's such it was so bizarre. Like we all know it's going to be
that.
Like I was saying it earlier, if you're going to do a story about the founding of the United States, when the Pilgrims got to Plymouth Rock, you wouldn't make a movie and show like Plymouth Rock and then change it to United States of America. Like
right.
It's going to be that in 100 years or 200, and it's frustrating when you can compare and contrast directly to House of the Dragon and Andor.
Yeah, and to the original Lord of the Rings movies. I mean, you're talking about characters not feeling like archetypes. I mean, the Lord of the Rings films gave us archetypal characters, but we believe those characters.
Right. Well, it's because look at how even when Gandalf shows up after, you listen to Bilbo's. I can't even remember if it's only in the extended version, but Bilbo gives that whole opening from There and Back Again concerning hobbits, and you hear the voiceover of all about Hobbiton, and it's wonderful. And you it's a place of basically all of us we are all the audience is all from the Shire. Yeah. We're not Aragorn, we're not Strider, we're not from Osgiliath, or we're not from the White City, or we're from the Shire. Yeah. And we're shown it through there when you hear Bilbo narrate what hobbits are all about, and then you meet Frodo, saying to Gandalf, "You're late." A wizard is never late. Or is never early, Frodo Baggins. He arrives, right when he means precisely when he means
precisely when he means to.
And you're like, oh, I'm in. Like suddenly these are people.
They are.
Whereas Galadriel hasn't said one thing that I relate to. Everything is a platitude. Everything is
speeches. They're always speaking.
It's fantasy speeches.
Yeah, I hear you.
And Michael Burnham speaks the same way in Star Trek Discovery. She's always delivering these platitudes and these speeches, and it's so weird. It's like this cliche what people think. It's like what people who don't watch Star Trek think Star Trek people speak like, because they've heard about it. Well, they're always fighting for what's right or whatever. So no one talks to each other on Discovery as if they're real people.
And then at the same time, when it comes to things like understanding the hierarchy of rank and the way that people should, be treating each other in a somewhat military kind of, hierarchical structure, they completely throw that off to the wayside. It's just like, no, you can't just talk to your captain like that.
Terrible.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
It's not good. Some old guy in Hawaii sends a $20 super chat in and says, "Hey, just finished Werewolf by Night. I loved it and every creative choice." And of course, the Giacchino scores his own film. That was one. Did you watch it? You did.
I haven't watched it, but I've been hearing a lot of good things about it. And
it's so much fun.
One thing that I really think Marvel needs to do more of is this idea of, hey, if we have a 1-hour story. If there's a character that could be explored in a short, film like this, let's do it. You know, why not? I really like that they decided to kind of go this direction. And I'm wondering if this would be a platform that they, from time to time, could explore a character this way. Just say, it doesn't have to be a 2 or 3 hour movie, and it doesn't have to be a multi-part series. Just kind of a short, the cinematic version of a short story.
And they used to do those on the physical media releases. They would have these Marvel one-shots, and they did some really fun. Yeah, they did some funny stuff. And good stuff. I mean, I'd love to see them. And Werewolf by Night, by the way, there's a lot of lore in Werewolf by Night. It's really, really well done, and they introduce interesting characters. And you know, the idea that the supernatural exists in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that there's a lot of good stuff there. Harris McGrade, who's a member of the channel, sends in a $20 super chat and says, I was in a stoner comedy play written for me this past summer that had a good run at the Fringe Festival, and the playwright and I are working on turning it into a stage play. Nice. Currently, do you have any recommendations on approaching producers? Well, it's funny. I'm not going to say who it is. I actually have a friend who is a Broadway producer who's quite successful in both film and television. And if it's good, if you have a script that's good, I could definitely throw it his way. But he's very discerning. I will say that he is very, very discerning. But it'd have to be really good. But yeah, I mean, it's really hard. The problem is if you've already had a play that had a good run somewhere, so that's obviously a leg up. So that's helpful.
Yeah, that gives you some credibility that you could tap into.
Our friend Martino Simoni sends an incredibly generous super chat. $100 super chat. Thank you so much, Martino. Martino got me my Playmobil Enterprise that I had hanging. I just moved it because I moved a shelf. You're going to be able to see it. It was hanging right above me. I had to move it because I was banging my head when I put up this new.
There's a Bird of Prey coming out now.
Oh, I know. It's really cool too.
Yeah.
It even comes with a Genesis Planet base.
The base, and it's Klingon shaped, and it's shaped into the Klingon insignia, but then it's all rocky. Yeah,
it's cool. I mean, the Enterprise actually, the Playmobil Enterprise came with this really ingenious, a hanging thing.
Yeah.
And so where the lights are on the sides, you could take them out, and you can actually use the hanging thing, and it hangs it's really stable. It's really great. And that's what I was using to hang it. Although
and the Bird of Prey also comes with a hanging thing as well. So it gives you the option to hang it.
It's really cool. But the thing about the Enterprise is the sound effects and all the lights are really cool. And you don't want to hang it where you can't access it. So it's got to hang low enough where you can take off the top and get on the inside of it. Because it's hard. I don't have any place to put it. It's too big for here. It's huge to put it. Mm-hmm. Although I might, because I'm moving my home theater system that was in here, I'm moving it into the house. We're having a dedicated home theater room. Okay. So I do have room for it.
Now you do.
I
didn't mean to interrupt Martino's comments. I don't know if Martino.
He just said hello all.
Okay, great.
He just said hello, Martino. Yeah. And by the way, Martino, if you haven't seen on the channel, he has made episodes of Play Trek using the Playmobil Enterprise. Every episode's better than the next, and he's been working on.
Very funny.
The new one looks fucking epic. It's in the Star Wars universe. He's built big sets. So look up the Play Trek stuff. It's on the Post-Geek Singularity channel, and he's promised me the episode will be ready in 7 days.
Ooh, nice.
So instead of Sadako coming out of the TV, we're going to get an episode of Play Trek.
Nice.
So it's coming. Alon again from Israel says, Rings of Power. I hope for everyone to die in flames and ashes and a time jump. Instead, everyone got plot armor and the episode didn't advance the story. Yeah, I'm surprised that I don't even know what the story of the show is.
The only episode that felt to me that had some semblance of story was the previous one, the one that led to the explosion of Mount Doom. The only one that kind of really felt like it had some movement or momentum. Everything else has felt just like going through the paces. You know, it's just, oh my gosh, how long is this I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. And like you said before, the event of Mordor being created, or the Mount Doom erupting, feels like a final episode, finale, to then pick up 100 years later in the next season, right? That's kind of how you would set that up logically. That's how you would think to set it up. But I don't know what the heck they're doing.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing is, even if they're going to deal with the destruction of Numenor and all this. I mean, when we haven't even met the people, Sauron has to disguise himself as an elf to get the rings of power even forged and all this.
Do you think they're even going to do that? I mean, they're talking about making that king Sauron. I mean, they're not following any of the established lore. So.
No, and that's the thing I don't. On one hand, they want you to know all the lore, but on the other hand, they also want you to realize they're going to throw all the lore out.
Totally. I mean, all this stuff about the Mithril being from the Balrog and the other thing. I mean, it's cool and all, but it's not based on anything that was written before.
Well, and also, like, if they're going to unleash a Balrog in Khazad-dûm now,
yeah,
like, wait, when Gimli goes into Khazad-dûm and when they're in the mines of Moria he's surprised that everyone there is dead.
Yeah, right, right.
And that's thousands of years from now.
I mean, maybe that was it. Maybe that was just to show us, hey, the Balrog is down there. Which, by the way, it looked identical to the Balrog from the movies.
Identical.
I
mean, I guess that's what the Balrog.
Did they just buy it off the shelf? They went to the Weta workshop and said, "Hey, can we just borrow that Balrog and stick it in here?" It was bizarre.
Yeah. That's crazy. Sujith, all the way from India, says, "Greetings from India, Rob. It's been a while watching you in Formula One qualifying for the Japanese Grand Prix. I geek out a lot on F1. Look, I grew up. I collected Corgi, or the metal Corgi cars when I was a kid. I loved Corgi and dinky F1 cars. I had this Lotus John Player Special, this Corgi that was an F1. I loved F1 cars when I was a kid.
The only Corgi vehicles I had were the James Bond ones, because they made the Goldfinger Aston Martin with the ejector seat.
They made the Moon Buggy from Diamonds Are Forever.
The Moon Buggy.
They later made the Lotus Esprit with the transforming Lotus
and you
Esprit.
Would click the little thing and they made the helicopter from
Moonraker.
From the Spy Who Loved Me, though. The helicopter in which, what's her name?
Yep. That's right. But they also made the Moonraker helicopter. Oh, they had the Spy Who Loved Me with the oceanography.
With the
Yeah. That's right.
With the logo of the Liparus or whatever.
Yep.
So
and then they made the Moonraker shuttle, and they made the moon and the Spy Who Loved Me and the Moonraker shuttle had the missiles, the firing missiles on the bottom.
Yeah.
And they made the Moonraker.
The helicopter from Spy Who Loved Me was the one piloted by what's her name?
Caroline Munro.
Caroline Munro, yeah.
Naomi.
Yep. I'm Naomi.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, there's a pretty interesting. I liked it, but it's not. It leaves out a lot. But the music, the sound of 007, dropped on Amazon 2 days ago. And it's a pretty good documentary about the music of 007. I mean, it's not they totally gloss over a lot of songs. Like, they don't even address Aha and their Aha's feud with John Barry, but they do. It's a pretty good overview of Bond. They talked, although I don't like the fact that Jack White is still apologizing for Another Way to Die, which is I love that song.
It's a great song.
It's a great song. It's dirty, It's I mean, I don't understand. People hate that song, and
people hate
that song.
People hate that song, and they hate that movie. And I'm going to be an apologist for that movie.
Dude, I am totally a Quantum of Solace apologist. The only problem with that movie is the way it's edited, and it's a little goofy because it was the writer's strike. But there's lots of great that set piece at the opera when they're singing Tosca.
Love it. Oh my gosh,
so good.
And he gets in on the conversation, and you see everybody standing up. I mean, that's just brilliant.
It's great.
It's just brilliant. Yeah.
And Olga Kurylenko is great too.
Yeah. No.
I'm
a big. I mean, to me, it's the epilogue to Casino Royale. I mean, that's what helps tell the complete story. And it's at the end of Quantum of Solace that Craig becomes Bond.
Yep.
That's I mean, that's why that's why I thought it was perfect for the movie to end with the gun barrel sequence, because that's when he becomes Bond. That's when we introduce the gun barrel sequence. To me, that's perfect. Yeah.
No, totally.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. And I can't believe I just got, it's funny. I forgot I even ordered this. This showed up. It's not even a 4K, but it's a Blu-ray with a steelbook for Dr. No. And I mean, I'm sure I'm not gonna buy any more because they're not in 4. I'm waiting for the box set, but it's kind of cool to have this because I have an original Dr. No one sheet that is museum quality mounted. It's an original. But I'm a huge Bond fanatic, and I can't believe it's been 60 years since the first Bond film.
And didn't you report recently that all of the movies are now on Amazon in
They
HD?
They're all on Amazon in UHD, although I've been told that they're not. I mean, it's funny because I disconnected my 4K because I'm moving it up to the 4K TV, and I can't. They're in UHD, but they're not in HDR.
Oh, okay.
So they're 4K, but they're not. I mean, they need to remaster them, but it's interesting. They look. I was watching on Her Majesty's Secret Service the other day. It looks great. I mean, they look great. Mm-hmm. But where's the box set? Where's the 60th anniversary 4K box set? I'm hoping. I mean, I hope they remaster them because I have the 50th anniversary box set. I want the 60th because who knows when they're going to make another. I mean, this era I feel like the end of the Craig era is the end of a Bond era for good. They'll make another Bond movie, but it's never going to be.
Yeah, no. I think we're going to look at a significant change in what James Bond is going forward. Yeah.
I mean, James Bond is a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a product of the Cold War.
Yeah,
As
and we may have to go back to the Cold War to reinvent him. I mean, I don't know at this point.
It's funny. Somebody said to me, without irony, they should go back and do Bond movies in the '60s, and I'm like,
Yep.
I mean,
I was thinking it would be awesome if Amazon, now that and I know that their licensing, their relationship with Bond is still a little murky. I'm not sure how much they're able to actually do with Bond, but I would love for them to have a series called Vintage Bond and do it in the style of like the mystery series on PBS, starting with the novels in chronological order and develop them as straight up adaptations of the novels in period. Have it be like a vintage Bond series?
Have you seen the OSS, the French, the more recent? They're spoofs.
Yes, the spoofs.
OFS with John Dujardin.
John Dujardin.
Those movies, the first one is shot. They even recreate the look of the film stock. And I mean, it's a parody of Bond. I mean, it's a parody of the OSS movies because those are the French answer to Bond, but really clever. I mean, I would love, they could go back and they could adapt all the books.
All of them. And there's a sequence to the books that has never been captured. I mean, I guess the Craig years kind of tried to do that sequential thing, but in the books, it felt much more organic. And the way that the character grows over time over the Ian Fleming novels, I think it would be just awesome to do it in that style. And I'm thinking, like the Poirot mysteries and PBS, but with James Bond. I don't know. I think it would be really cool.
Oh, I also would love to do a reverse Bond and do a show about Spectre.
Yeah.
I mean, the rise of Spectre, coming out of the remnants of World War II and how Spectre started. And literally, they're the anti-heroes you love to hate or whatever. But I would love to see a Spectre series.
Yeah, and even because we've always seen Spectre fail, but in order for Spectre to get where they got to, they had to have had successes too. So it would be great to see them, infiltrating and creating and becoming the powerhouse that they become. Yeah, that would.
Oh,
they
would win. They would win.
Yeah.
Spectre would. I would love to see that.
There's actually a series, Rob. Thinking of this idea of the direct adaptations of the Fleming novels, there's an audio series that the BBC has been doing for many years now, I've only found them like on YouTube and such. You can search for the BBC kind of radio adaptations of James Bond.
Oh yeah.
And they're very good. And so that to me would be kind of like what I would use as the template for some kind of keep it low budget, keep it, centered on the stories. Like I would love to see Moonraker, the actual novel Moonraker, adapted.
Oh,
It's
it'd be
such
awesome.
a great story, and it's the Moonraker movie is great in its own way, but the original story is so good, and we've never actually gotten that story. I would love to see that.
I agree, and make it serialized and follow those books. And
Mm-hmm.
although I just I don't know, like, as much as I'd like to see that kind of thing because I'm such a Bond fan, I don't know if it would work. It might work.
Again, I think the only by keeping it low budget and by treating it as kind of a throwback, like mystery or something like that. I think that would be the appeal of it, right? It wouldn't be the multi-million production that that we associate with Bond now and the big, large budget productions that we're talking about. It would be kind of really toning it down. And not to say that we would replace the movies with that. I would just, that now to me, it's kind of like an alternate take, similar to how DC is exploring all these different approaches in the DC universe. Let's see Bond, vintage Bond. And then here we have modern Bond. And here we have Spectre, like you said, kind of having all these different ways to explore the Bond universe.
It would be really, really interesting to see. Yeah. And you parallel the rise of Blofeld. And that's what Spectre would be. You'd see Ernst Stavro Blofeld coming out of the end of World War II, and he's not fucking connected to James Bond like they did in the Craig era. It's like, come on. Cuckoo.
No, we all know that he grows up to become Jeff Bezos.
Exactly right. A Silly Goose says, Rob, did you manage to get Event Horizon on 4K? I still have not been able to get it. It's easily a top 5 of mine. The TV show is still coming, allegedly. Well, I did. Not only did I get Event Horizon in 4K, I've got the big box set, and then I also have an extra 4K steelbook that somebody asked me about that I have. I was just looking for it. I thought it was back. I have a stack of stuff here somewhere. Let's see. Well, it's here somewhere. I do have one. I do have an extra one. Yeah. So if you really need it, somebody else wanted it, and I forget who it was, and I was like, okay. Alex Detman says, speaking of Bond, have you checked out the newer comics? If you've not, check them out, because I feel his character fits your stereotype. I've been buying Bond comics sporadically, and I've liked them. I buy them when they're collected.
Is it Dynamite that's publishing?
Yeah, there was Dynamite that was doing them, and they're pretty good. So Alex, I do enjoy them.
I think I read one of the first series, right? Because they kind of break up their stories over a few issues. I think I read the first one of those. I also like that they've done a Felix Leiter series. So again, that would be another cool spinoff, right? Do the Felix Leiter spinoff stories, or kind of how he came into his own, without Bond, right? Like kind of knowing Felix Leiter's side of the story. So, and I believe, there's as part of those comic books, they've done a Felix series, and they've also done an M series, kind of again exploring.
That's cool.
Yeah, M's development. Yeah.
I have a letter. I want to read this letter. It's from Joe from Montreal. Mm-hmm. It's short. He writes, the subject headline is Rings of Power. Didn't hate it, but I didn't really like it either. Hey, Rob, while I didn't hate the Rings of Power, I didn't really like it either. It didn't feel special. It felt ordinary, like every other fantasy series. What gets me is that Amazon spent $1 billion to get the rights and produce this. And what if it only warrants 2 seasons? Is the cost justified? I also read the source material, and while I understand the concept of adaptation, they kind of made their own thing here, and was it worth it? That's a real question. I mean, what do you think? Look, like we were talking about earlier, what I find so strange, I mean, obviously I love watching Gary Beekler Nerdrotics reviews of Rings of Power because I recognize my reviews of Star Trek in him because he loves Tolkien so much and he knows the
Right.
lore and stuff and I feel his pain. He did a review. He actually did a review where he opened it with a clip of John Campea from our show, and his review was just hilarious. I was howling, and that's what I don't what I don't understand is I don't like you watch Andor, and I feel that every scene and every bit of Andor is completely thought through. Every line of dialogue means something. It's adding to the understanding that you have of each character that's in the middle of the conversation. Everything is nuanced. There's so many Easter eggs. It feels like adults made the show.
Yeah.
And I watch Rings of Power, and there's so much goofy shit all around. I don't believe any of it.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of those characters. Like you watch House of the Dragon, I believe those characters. When you watch the wake last week that opened with that wake where they're all looking at one, I'm like, oh my god, I've been there, man. I get what's going on, but with Rings of Power, I'm like, I don't. Whereas Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf shows up in the Shire with Frodo and goes and sees Bilbo, I believe it.
Yeah,
I believe that's how people talk to each other. There hasn't been one conversation in Rings of Power that I believe. I mean, I enjoy Elrond and Durin talking to each other, but even they're written like they're from some other show that they've dropped into Middle Earth.
Yeah,
Like here's two dudes you can hang out with.
It's not friendly conversation, right? It's always kind of all this gravitas and all this. Everything has to be like you say, like a speech or a platitude. I think it's interesting, and I don't know to what extent the series, being an Amazon show, is influenced by Jeff Bezos, but not a few months ago, that rocket that Jeff Bezos sent into space and William Shatner was aborted. I don't know if you remember seeing some of the footage afterwards when Shatner came out. He really had a profound experience.
Yep.
And Jeff Bezos approaches him with like a bottle of champagne, going all frat boy,
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that's kind of how it feels with Lord of the Rings. It's like, we got Lord of the Rings, awesome. We got this amazing thing, but there hasn't been the time to really reflect and treat the property with the respect that it deserves. It's almost like I have the money to do this, so I did it, but I didn't really think it through, kind of in the same way that, I have the money to send somebody to space, but I'm not really thinking about the impact this can have truly on humanity. It's just another thing to kind of check off my list. It just kind of feels very artificial and very superficial in that way.
Yeah, I feel like, well, first of all, what they chose to adapt, the Second Age, they're trying to compress literally thousands of years of story into a regular narrative, and it doesn't work. Because that's why they have Mordor created in a day, and I'm watching going, that's not how it works. That's not
right.
Mordor was Mount Doom didn't just grow in a day, and then they're like, what's the name of our land, my lord? It's more, and then the lower third burns to Mordor. You've got it's Elvish language.
So silly.
It's so silly. It's so silly. It doesn't. You look at it and you're like, and here's the thing. There's a lot of vitriol in fan circles lately, and of course, there's a lot of YouTube channels that sort of tread on that. But the problem is, we're all reacting to the same thing. Right. We're all reacting to these people that have decided to go after these properties, and the people that end up working on them. No one's going to say no to a big lucrative job. Everybody wants, and I don't begrudge anybody for taking a job, but when you're taking on something that people love, and you are not hiring people that are capable of doing this. And I'll tell you something else. There's a big difference between someone like a Vince Gilligan, a showrunner, and a Tony Gilroy. I mean, these are very smart men, and they're very smart women showrunners as well. And they really understand storytelling. They've read a lot. And I feel like even when I'm watching, the guys that made Star Trek Beyond is their one credit. And I'm like, that's the guys who made Star Trek Beyond are making Lord of the Rings. I mean, I really feel that you need to spend 2 or 3 years or 4 years steeped in the mythology before you even sit down to write it, because by definition, they don't have the Second Age is a bunch of historical. There's no voice. There's no characters. There's no Lord of the Rings, and there's no Hobbit. And I almost feel that maybe what Amazon should have done was readapt Lord of the Rings and take their time with it. You know, each season they could have made a 10 episode or a 20 episode series of each book, and you could have put Tom Bombadil in there. You could have put everybody singing. You could have made it the 50 years or however long it takes when Gandalf first leaves and then comes back and finds out about the ring, you know, and wants to see it again. You could have done that, and maybe it would have been more gratifying. You know, it's 20 years later. Why not we remake Lord of the Rings, but we expand it into more of the complete novel? Call it what you want. Because this Second Age, it doesn't work. Now, I'm not saying if you like it, you can like it. I'm not criticizing anybody, but as a show and as a follow-up to Lord of the Rings, it feels like I'm watching the YA version of the Second Age.
It feels very YA. Now that you say it, that's very true. It does have that kind of YA feeling to it.
Yeah, I mean, when you do things like, well, I'm hiding where the wine is in this boat in the harbor, and my friend comes along with a torch. He's carrying a torch into a boat, you know, at night, a wooden boat. Here's the torch I have. Well, that's not very smart.
Right.
You know, I mean, don't carry an open flame. At least have it inside a glass lantern or something.
Right.
And when I'm watching that, I'm like, what am I, stupid? And then, of course, the boat blows up. And I'm like, who thought that was a good idea? What brain trust looked at that script moment and said, oh, we're going to blow up one of these boats, so let's just have a character be really dumb.
Yeah, exactly. It was to serve whatever direction they needed the story to go. And it didn't even really make that much sense. So you mean to tell me, so they had 5 boats that were going to go to Middle Earth, which why that wasn't how the next episode started, I don't understand. When the previous episode ends with, okay, we're going to send the boats to Middle Earth. I was expecting this next episode to be, we're there, you know, but no, we're going to spend another entire day in Numenor deliberating who knows what. But then they burn down these 2 boats. So then finally, when they do go at the end of this episode, they send 3 boats. And I'm like, this is Numenor. This is a nation built by ship, like the best navigators in all of Middle Earth. You mean to tell me that they can't pull out 2 extra boats? And that's, you know, I mean, it just didn't make any sense. It was just pointless. I don't understand. It just feels like if I think of these things, why can't the folks writing this? And what was the consequences of sending 3 boats instead of 5? It didn't matter the way that the story developed. So why did they even go that direction? It's just so strange.
No, I mean there's all this stuff that it just because. I mean, it's all just because. And that's my problem, that the writing, I mean, I think one of the things about House of the Dragon that's so interesting is it's all just human interaction. We know what greed and avarice and envy and all that is, and you're just watching real human interaction in a very contained environment. Yeah. And we're jumping around, we're watching the Harfeets because they have to have hobbits in the show.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm like, why are they doing this? I'm much more interested. I do not believe the Middle Earth that they're depicting. Aren't there any other cities? Yeah. Is there just Lindon and Numenor? Is that it? Like, does nobody live in the rest of Middle Earth? Are there no other cities there? Is there nothing where Gondor is going to be? Like, what? And it feels like it's very small. Like by you've got this nomadic tribe that just travels around. They just wagon train, you know.
And I don't understand, why are they traveling all the time? Why haven't, like, there's no reason why they haven't settled down, because they know agriculture, they grow things all the time. Once you become an agrarian culture, don't you stop being nomadic? I mean, I don't understand kind of how that works. So,
you know, I don't either. I don't understand most things. I don't understand Galadriel. I don't understand why are the elves not talking to one another. Well, we didn't tell you this. You know, we didn't tell you the story. Like it's And if you want to do the intrigue of the distrust of the different races, well, that's all fine and well and good. But it even seems like, during 3 and during the 4th and during the 3rd, I mean, we're going to get into this argument over mithril and mining and you're mining to sell your metals to people.
Right.
And so sell mithril to the elves, and they've completely retconned mithril anyway. And I'm like, why?
I know.
Why are you doing? Why did you do that?
Yeah. They stole it from Kirk in Star Trek 6. Let them die. It's their time to die.
Yeah, I'm like, what? What?
I know.
That's the thing. I don't understand. See, the funny thing about the people that are writing Rings of Power is what they don't understand is when here's my big writing lesson for anybody who wants to write science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Take all of that out. What you're writing is a story about human beings. Even if you're writing stories about monsters, you're writing stories about human beings. You're writing stories that are delving into the truth of human existence. If you are choosing to do it through the prism of science fiction, fantasy, or horror, that's great. But your story first has to work without all of that stuff.
Without any of that, exactly.
And so the whole idea of when you watch Lord of the Rings, you understand that Bilbo Baggins is a man that once went on this journey and had this adventure, and that was the most exciting thing that's ever happened to him. And he has this ring that's sort of slowly been corrupting him, but he's not a bad person, so he hasn't been using it. He has it, he wants it, it's got a hold over him, but not so much that he can't give it away. But you still understand on his 11th birthday or whatever, you get where he's at. You understand Bilbo as a person. Yeah. And you understand Frodo as a person, and you understand Gandalf as an advisor. He's a dude as well. He's Bilbo's oldest friends and all this, and you understand the townspeople and the Sackville Bagginses and all that crap. You get it because they're people. Take away the hobbits out of it, take away that's in Middle-earth. You totally understand the motivations of those people. Mm-hmm. And all science fiction, fantasy, and horror should be written that way. Ultimately, they're stories about us. We just love the genre trappings of science fiction, fantasy, and horror stories. Right. But I mean, and if they don't, whereas Rings of Power, it doesn't work as a story. Everything is archetypical, and I don't believe any like Isildur and Elendil, Arendelle. Arendelle, his father, and Isildur. I'm like, what is you've given them a beef like there's some problem, or like why aren't you doing this, or why aren't you doing that, and why aren't you being a good son? I'm like, I don't believe that. You have not earned that yet. It's convenient writing, and I don't believe it. I don't believe anything that I've seen in Rings of Power. Now that's not to say people. I'm more discerning than most. I'm a hard audience for this kind of stuff, and I understand there's a lot of people that like it and don't care. They're watching it for the entertainment value, and it's fine. Mm-hmm. I can't do that. Yeah. Because I've seen so many different, or read so many different stories. I think that this is really not thought out. Mm-hmm. And it's very haphazardly written, and it won't hold up to scrutiny, and it bothers me.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think I hate or dislike the show. It just feels for the investment that has been made into this series to end up with something that just kind of leaves me with a kind of a mediocre feeling. I just think it's just not, it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be something that I just come out feeling it's pretty mediocre. It's just kind of meh,
Well, and what's so funny is that Tolkien thought all of this through. Mm-hmm. Like if you read all of his stuff, he really knew what was going on with everyone. And ultimately you have to ask yourself, what was Tolkien saying with all of this? And it was all through the reflection of what it was like living in the beautiful bucolic UK, out in the countryside, and what it meant, and how all of that could be swept away by war. And he saw what happened in World War II with literally trench warfare is fucking Mordor.
Right.
Those destroyed, blown out landscapes. I mean, that's where you fight the orcs. Mordor is World War II trench warfare. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's all right there. It's not about, you're creating a character like Adar who was a botched attempt to turn him into an orc. You know, he was an elf that was turned into an orc, but it didn't take. He only got halfway there, and he still remembers. But I look at Adar, I'm like, okay, you talked about wanting to go. Why didn't you go back to your own people and see if you could get fixed? But no, he feels like he's a father to his orcs now. But why?
Right.
Just because they make it. I've seen him. He's spoken platitudes and all that, but he's not. I don't believe him. Just go home to the elves, man. Maybe they can fix you.
Yeah. You were speaking earlier, Rob, about how would you have done a story in the Second Age, and I would recommend checking out. This is my friend Jorge shared this with me, but there's a channel on YouTube called Tolkien Untangled. I don't know if you're familiar with it, and they've done a series. I want to say it's 2 or 3 episodes. And this guy is, way beyond my knowledge of Tolkien. He's like a total Tolkien scholar, but he's done a series called what should the Rings of Power have been about, and not fearing taking time jumps of hundreds or thousands of years in between episodes to tell kind of aspects of the story. So it's a really interesting, and it's long, right? Each episode is like an hour long. So you need your time to sit through it. But I think it'll give you a good perspective from somebody who does, I think, treat and understand the material with a lot of reverence, how they would have gone about adapting or developing this story as opposed to what we're seeing in Rings of Power. So.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating.
Yeah.
Sonny Dominguez says, are you still doing road tripping? Road tripping I was doing with Mike Bodden, and then he went to Kazakhstan for a while, and he's back now. And we would do those. Those are fun.
Yeah.
So we haven't done them in a while, but they were fun. Channel suggestion, can you weekly put a couple of movie suggestions for the week, a la the employee pick area, and you would see at Blockbuster? Be great to discuss those films with you. That's a really good idea, Sonny. I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to do, like, I'm going to start doing Rob's picks and be like Star Trek episodes to watch and like, do a movie to watch. And that's a really great idea. And
that wouldn't take you too long. It would just be like a little 5 or 10 minute segment.
Yeah, that's a really great, Rob's picks for the week.
You could probably even bank some of those, record a few of them, ahead of time, and then just release them on a schedule.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And do things like, here's 3 dystopian science fiction movies from the 1970s that you should watch. And that's actually a really good. I don't know why I don't do that.
Yeah,
I bet people would watch those.
Be fun.
I have to come up with some stupid title like Robservations, something because I like the ridiculous titles. I like all the nicknames people hang on me.
Right.
Well, listen, dude, I think we should wrap this up. By the way, Stubble McShave says, I didn't believe all the horses would fit in the boats. Neither did I.
I totally agree, especially all those horses. I mean, I don't understand. That was 3 boats.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Also, Glenn Mark says, the James Bond radio dramas sound awesome, Roberto. I'm definitely going to check those out.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube and search for them, they've been all posted there. And the guy who plays James Bond it's the guy who played the bad guy in Die Another Day. Toby, is it Toby?
Toby. I want to say not Toby Jones.
No, it's not Toby Jones.
He was also in Lost in Space.
He was
the father in Lost in Space.
The father in Lost in Space, and he was also in that pirate TV show. That was
in
like
Black Sails.
Black Sails, yeah. So it's that actor he's the guy who plays the voice of Bond in those radio dramas.
Oh, he's great. Toby Stevens.
Toby Stevens. So if you go on YouTube and do a search, I think there's playlists put together with all of those.
Oh yeah, that's a really good idea.
Ian McKellen plays Goldfinger.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, in the Goldfinger episode, Ian McKellen plays Goldfinger. Yeah, no, they cast some really interesting voices for those. They're really fun.
Wow.
And they're abridged. They're abridged, so they're not the full novel, but they're nice. Within an hour and a half, it gives you the whole story. They're really well done.
That's okay. I didn't know that. I'm gonna go play those. Well, listen, Roberto, this was good. We got a 2-hour conversation out of this. This is an interesting, a rambling Robservations, different than, but it was still fun.
Yeah, well, we started with Namor, we ended with Lord of the Rings, and we talked about everything in between.
Yeah, this was a good and I was drinking Diet Coke, so someone's like, it's better when you're drunk, and I'm like, yeah, well, different kinds of shows.
Oh,
I had
well.
done a Robservations. This was fun. Um, Actually, Elon comes up with something pretty good. Instead of recommendations, Rob, I don't know how I would say it. Rob commendations.
Rob commendations.
Rob
All right.
commendations.
Uh-huh.
I like that. That's pretty good. If I can make that work, that's hard to say.
It is hard to say, yeah. It's Rob commended. I Rob commend that.
Yeah. Bob commendations or something. Maybe we'll figure that out. I got to play with that, Elon. Well, on that note, I want to thank my esteemed colleague, Roberto Suarez. Where can people find you online?
The easiest way, if you look at Puerto Geekan, that's, Puerto like Puerto Rico, and Geekan, Geekan. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all those places at Puerto Geekan.
Now, and you're going to, what is the name of your show you're doing with Alex? What is the all Spanish show going to be?
It's going to be we're the Latinx force, which is the Latino mutant, the mutant force from Latin America. So that's going to be our show.
Man, do I love it.
Alex and I will be the Latinx men in Latinx force.
Yeah, get me the trailer. I'll play that before every show.
Alex is working on it. We did some work on it last week, and so hopefully he's going to be putting it together. He's been very busy, but we'll get to it.
And you can also follow me of course, on Instagram at RM Burnett. Follow me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or follow me here and subscribe and all that. And we'll do a member chat on Sunday. So if you're a member of the channel,
yeah,
we'll do it. We do member chats where we just hang out and all the members we talk, and you can ask me anything, and it's fun. Those are fun.
Yeah.
And that'll be good. And then, of course, I think I'm going to do another. Lael and are at the New York Comic Con, so they're enjoying themselves. So that's why we're not doing a Midnight Musings tonight or tomorrow. But I'm going to do another. I'm going to try and get back to doing a Robservations every day, or at least 5 days a week. And then because
that's a lot with your Pampia schedule too.
Yeah, because I feel like I've let the channel. I was working so hard getting the channel and building an audience, and it's really stagnated. And I feel like I don't want to throw all that good work away. And we have a great audience, so
yeah.
I mean, even tonight we there's 252 people watching right now, so
yeah,
we'll do more of that. And also, Elizabeth and I are going to bring back whining about movies. And for those of you who don't know, Elizabeth, my girlfriend, and I, we drink a bottle of wine and talk about a film. And I think the first one we're going to do is Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That'd be a great way to kick things off again.
Yeah, so that'll be fun. Yeah. And it's fun because I got so many new discs that I want to watch, and Elizabeth hasn't seen movies. And now that we're going to have a dedicated movie room, I like the fact that we're going to have all my surround sound system is going to be a place where the dogs aren't around, and it's just a room you can go in and watch things. And so in 4K, awesome. Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, and Dolby Vision. So it'll be lots of fun. And on that note then, Roberto, I would say that, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to every one of you, comment down below and all that. Yeah. And I want to thank Roberto Suarez, and I want to thank my moderating staff, Tom Jr. Jackson. If you don't know him, you should. He has his own YouTube channel. He'll tell you where that is. He's in the live chat. He started his own YouTube channel. He talks a lot about Funko Pops, which is always a good thing.
And I hear that he's been telling me recently that I think To Live and Die in LA is going to come out in 4K.
Where is it? They announced it a year ago. That's good. That was a very good callback, Roberto. And for you longtime viewers of the channel, everyone fucks at my expense. One of my favorite movies, and but that was very good. Well done, sir. Well done. And all right. Well, I would say to you, hold on for a minute, Roberto.
Yep.
But to everyone, I will see you later in the next video.